Hello, everyone who's logged in from far and wide. Thanks for joining us today for our third Growers Conference. My name's Kelly Fife and I'm the Manager of Stakeholders at Lower Murray Water. For those who don't know the origin of the conference, it actually was an idea from our Rural Customer Advisory Committees. They wanted to see a place and a chance for growers to be able to get together, talk about things of concern and other things that they could share with each other, and also bring together some information that was current, up to date, and some policymakers so that they could have a two-way conversation, sharing information and giving some insights to those policymakers. So 3 years ago, the first Growers Conference was born. It's a bit unusual. It's in a virtual format, and we all know why. We were deciding whether we should just give it a rest for the year, but in consultation with our grower committees, we decided to forge ahead, and it snuck up on us a little bit just because of the coronavirus pandemic and the restrictions that are on. So we bring this to you today in a shortened version, and we hope that you enjoy what the speakers have to offer, and there's some information that you'll get out of it. So I'm just doing a few housekeeping things, not the normal things like where the toilets and food are, because if you don't know where they are in your own house or office or wherever you might be, then there's a little bit of a problem. But you'll probably want to know things like when you can ask questions. So the process for asking questions, the program that you may have seen on on the website when you booked and is now up on your screen. We've allowed 10 minutes question time at the end of each speaker. Now, unfortunately, we can't be interactive because we've got quite a few people on the line. We've had about 50 people register so far, and more are coming in as we speak. So there's some people submitted questions prior when they booked, but at the bottom of your screen, if you hover your mouse at the bottom, there's a Q&A tab. If you click on that, you're welcome to type your question in for that speaker. And if we don't get to all of the questions, we will certainly provide them to the speaker so that they're not lost. The exception to this is the first session, because so that you have the most time with the visiting speakers, we're Lower Murray Water staff, we're here, we're local, we welcome your questions at any time. So the other thing to note is at the end of each of the sessions after the Q&A, there's a little poll. It's only 4 questions we're asking just to get your feedback following the topic to see if that was useful to you, and will help us actually program for next conferences next year. So you can answer those on the screen, they won't take long. Then there'll be a 5-minute break, and there'll be some interesting videos if you'd like to watch them, or duck off to the kitchen if you want to get a top up. So the last thing I'd just like to say is that we have a survey at the end, a big survey for those who want to give a huge amount of feedback. That'd be fantastic. You can do that on screen. The conference will be recorded, so if you need to duck out and you miss the session, don't worry. On our website following the conference will be all of the conference proceedings, so you can share them with your friends who couldn't make it. And we do hope that this conference brings some information and interesting things for you that you can take away. And we do thank you for your time, wherever you may be out there at the moment, to join us. So I'll hand over to our chair, Cheryl Ricks, to officially welcome you all to the conference. Have a great day.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kelly, for that introduction. And I know you've been working really hard on this conference, and with your team, I appreciate all the efforts that Lower Murray Water team have made to bring this to everyone today. So as Chair of Lower Murray Water, I welcome all of our customers, representative of customer committees, stakeholders from industry and government, board members and staff to the 2020 Virtual Growers Conference. I thank the many presenters who are available today to provide the latest information. Lower Murray Water also acknowledges the traditional owners of the land on which we work and reside. We recognise their continuing connection to land, waterways and community, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. Lower Murray Water's Acknowledgement of Country that you see on screen was written by one of our newest team members, Stephanie Sloan. Steph is a proud Nyampa woman who was recruited to a newly established identified Aboriginal position in May. its creation being a direct action from our Reconciliation Action Plan. And this was developed in collaboration with traditional owners in our service region. Steph's very talented sister Bella produced the wonderful accompanying artwork titled The Connection to Family, and we thank her very much for allowing us to use this. The Lower Murray Water vision, which you're seeing on the screen, an infographic with some of the key points that are in the vision for Lower Murray Water, but we've reported in our annual report our vision and our performance for the year, and we've really focused on customer engagement once again in the last 12 months and looking forward, particularly being resilient and adaptable this year, and looking at growing both our urban and rural businesses. And we know Mildura is growing. We have a high sense of optimism, even with everything that's gone on, that we're seeing large housing developments going on, and we're still seeing horticultural, optimism in many of our crops. And I'm, very pleased to hear that the citrus season was pretty good, and hoping that our grape season's coming forward and all of our other associated crops will go well. We continuously strive to improve as a business, and with Anthony at the helm as Managing Director for over 12 months now, the board and executive are developing a new strategic plan to, one, capture the many opportunities for One Lower Murray Water to drive business performance, but also to recognise, I guess, COVID has really challenged us and how we're looking at the way we do things. So it's really timely that we're refreshing our strategic plan and consulting with our customer base, and also, consulting with all of our team members to make sure we've got something that we can live and breathe by and actually really strive to achieve. 2020 has been the year none of us will forget in a hurry. It's unprecedented and challenging is one way of describing it. And I'm sure you all have your own descriptions of what you have faced in your personal lives as business owners and operators, and more generally what we've all faced as a regional community with our border closures and many things that have impacted us. I acknowledge specifically the impact of COVID-19, that large overlay, but also the reduced water allocations of the previous year, the high allocation prices which reflected our dry seasons and the sequence of dry years, and I guess the new zero tolerance of Lower Murray Water to unauthorised water use. And we recognise that all of these things have had impacts on our growers to different degrees. We have really continued to work very closely with customers in financial hardship, and we have had to continuously adapt to changing circumstances from policy directives that, as you all know, things have been moving very rapidly this year, and we know we're a long way from business as usual. Our Lower Murray staff have been largely working at home under government directive since March, and the operations of Lower Murray Water have not faltered, with capital programs being successfully delivered and water delivery being absolutely maintained. So our core business, we're very proud to say, has been maintained well and intact. And we've also had the time, I guess, this year to really focus on master planning and looking forward. And there's some exciting things coming around our irrigation strategy and other pieces of work. The theme of this year's Growers Conference is what we hear is important to you, and really we need to help your business succeed. And the only way we can do that is by delivering water from the Murray River to your farm gate. And the other part of that sentence is at an affordable price. And this one's always going to be pretty number one in the view of growers, particularly with many of our other input costs increasing. Our commitment to you in this area has not changed since developing our pricing submission in partnership with our customers, and that was approved by the Essential Services Commission. We're in year 3 of that 5-year plan, and we continue to maintain that identified price path. So reduced water availability, water quality issues during the year. We had some unusual algae this year, and increasing competition for the available water remain significant issues for our business, our customers and our communities. So whether it be urban, agricultural, horticultural, environmental, or other uses, overall demand for a share of the available waters of the Murray-Darling Basin system in a drying climate is increasing. And this changing demand is placing our iconic river system under pressure to perform for all of these stakeholders, and often with competing expectations. So I know you're going to hear about the increased competition in the water market today, and there have also been significant changes across the southern connected Murray-Darling Basin, which are creating challenges. And certainly our growers have been consulted and working closely with government around the changes to the Goulburn River and its delivery challenges as well. Contributing to resolving the complexities of some of the increased competition for water is Lower Murray's role as lead agency in the delivery of the Victorian Murray Floodplain Restoration Project. This has been, we've had at least well over a year now working with this project and planning the project. And Anthony will explain more in his presentation about the progress and the status of the various elements of this project. We hope that you find the bringing together of policymakers in their presentations today informative and of benefit to you in planning and undertaking your business. I understand it is really difficult to concentrate on Zoom for extended periods of time, and encourage you to catch up if you miss a session by accessing the recorded presentations. I really look forward to the day when we can all be in the same room together, face to face, connecting and discussing the important issues that impact our futures. I think that's one of the things we've all missed this year, just being able to be in the same room. And as a board, our challenge has been, like everyone else's, not even being able to be in the same room. Please remain connected to the Lower Murray Water team, and I encourage you all to read the 2020 Lower Murray Water Annual Report when it becomes available in the next month once it's tabled in Parliament. It is a really insightful read into what Lower Murray Water does and its performance. I wish you all the best for your irrigation seasons as we move into the warmer months, and most importantly, stay safe. And please enjoy the sessions, ask those questions, because I know our presenters, really do want to hear from you and understand the things that are keeping you awake at night, and would like to respond to those questions. And before I finish, I'd just like to acknowledge the Lower Murray Water team more generally in such a tough year. And Anthony, you'll see his background is that we have had the wonderful accolade this year of the best tasting tap water in Victoria. So I think, that's just celebrate our achievements as a region. We've got many more coming our way, I know, and welcome, Anthony, and I'll now hand over. Thanks, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.
Good work, Cheryl.
Thanks, Cheryl. So I've got a high level and relatively quick introduction to the year as we saw it from Lower Murray Water's perspective. I'm delighted to welcome our rural customers and rural industry stakeholders along to our third Growers Conference. I'm sure you'll find it interesting, informative. There's some really good presentations coming up and looking forward to hearing those too. We have confronted an array of challenges over the last 12 months. And despite that, I'd say it's been a solid year for the organisation as we've confronted those challenges positively and collaboratively. And throughout it, we've delivered our services largely without any substantial interruptions, and we've continued to reform the business. So with that, I'll kick off. As I gain control of technology. So just an acknowledgement of the better season ahead based on the outlook for our rural customers. Seasonal determination is currently 55%. This time last year it was 40%. Last year we reached 66% as the maximum seasonal determination, and with average inflows this year we're headed for about 100%. So that is a very good position to be in, and I'm sure this improved availability just provides a sense of relief across the industry with the array of challenges that are to be dealt with. Reduced water availability is not one of those challenges that we enjoy having to deal with. So it's a good position. In terms of the outlook for the urban, so this is a rural forum, but of course we'll visit to our region's towns, and Lower Murray Water provides the urban water to those towns So the outlook there is positive as well. When we talked to you this time last year, we foreshadowed the likelihood of urban water use restrictions in our towns. And not that we want people to stop using our best tasting tap water in Victoria for 2020, but we were confronting a shortfall of available allocation and had to take that step in November. They were lifted in June with the return of good inflows to our system storages. And I'm pleased to report that our customer and community response to those restrictions was very positive. People embraced that change, and we've come out of it much stronger. It's also a measure of what we can do when we work well with our customers. Through the chaos, what I'll call the chaos of the coronavirus, and in particular in the second half of the financial year, the Lower Murray Water Board's committed to the development of a new strategic plan, which Cheryl alluded to earlier. It's not ready to be shared just yet, but the plan is a comprehensive one that addresses the key challenges that the organisation faces. I very much look forward to concluding the development of the strategic plan and implementing it in 2021 and beyond, and describing to our customers and stakeholders how they're going to benefit from that vision. I've also enjoyed engaging with the strategic advisory and customer service advisory committees over the last 12 months. We've continued to engage with these customer representative groups, in particular in the development of our strategic plan, and are providing increased transparency over our day-to-day operations and priorities, and getting feedback from our customers on that, and in turn confronting and harnessing those challenges and opportunities together, which is the key to success for Lower Murray Water and for our customers. In particular, I want to point out the capacity sharing tool. That is a way of sharing available system capacity within the 4 pump districts. We're piloting that in Redcliffs at the moment with the cooperation of our capacity sharing advisory group, but also with the Redcliffs Customer Service Advisory Committee, getting good feedback, getting good insights, and doing the best we can to engage our customers in what is a significant challenge for the business. As I described, it's been a fairly phenomenal and challenging 12 months, not just because of coronavirus, which struck us in March. We've had urban water use restrictions associated with reduced water availability, and what you see here is a picture of inside one of our water treatment plants at Redcliffs that, due to the impact of blue-green algae in December, we had to call emergency outdoor water use restrictions in Mildura and surrounds, and we had to have a boil water notice in Redcliffs due to our inability to supply enough water out of both of those systems. Also in January 2020, we experienced a widespread power outage around Robinvale, with power lost at 8 AM and restored at 9 PM, so over 12 hours without power, and on a 40-degree day. So that could be pretty exciting in a region that's up and about with some very strong crops. But I'm pleased to say that despite the difficulties of a day without water, we worked with our customers and were able to bring the system back on overnight. And through the next 48 hours, we worked with our customers to get an equitable sharing of water. Each challenge was confronted. So I've provided you with some key challenges that we've confronted in the last 12 months. Each was confronted positively and ultimately overcome with service delivery interruptions minimised where we were able to. As Cheryl indicated, rural unauthorised take has been a priority for the business over the last 6 to 12 months. Reduced water availability and upward movements in water prices has seen motivation for customers to take water that they're not entitled to. So in response to that, the Victorian government's taken a very strong position, and with that, Lower Murray Water has taken a very strong position. And this makes sure that the intent of the water market, the security of the water market is preserved. And I think that's a good thing for all irrigators, and whether you're water holders or not, the integrity of the water market is important. This next slide gives us an insight into Lower Murray's unauthorised take performance on two measures here. So the orange line is unauthorised take, that is water being used by our customers as a percentage of our total rural water deliveries. That is unauthorised take, that is not in their accounts. And you can see in the 2018-19 year, it spiked at 6%. In 2019-20, it spiked at 3%. So that's 2 years of data. And then we get into the start of 2020-21, where we're back down very close to zero, that orange line. In terms of our number of ABA holders, that's the blue line. And you can see that's a similar shape, but significantly higher. That is in 2018-19, about 14% of our ABA holders went into unauthorised take. In 2019-20, it got to about 11%. At the end of the chart there, you'll see a grey line and a green line. They now represent our key performance indicators. And you'll see that we're below those now. So that is good, but you'll also see as you move to the left of the screen that in the last 2 years, we've spent little time below that KPI. So for Lower Murray Water to maintain unauthorised take below those two KPIs will be a significant challenge. We've dedicated significant resources to it in the last 12 months. We'll continue to do so and expect that downward trend to be continued as we work with our customers to ensure that we meet that KPI. Also focusing on customer compliance with water orders, particularly within the irrigation district. So this is just 1 month of data that is indicative of our overall performance. So for September, within the 4 districts, we had 75% of water ordered and used according to that order. But we also had 12% used with no order, and we had 13% ordered and not used. So my goal is to eliminate that orange and grey wedge from that circle and have our customers ordering and using water entirely within the bounds of a water order, because both the orange and the grey impact on other customers. This is a very detailed slide that I won't spend too much time on. It provides an insight into our other compliance actions associated with Section 33 unauthorised take and Section 289 of the Water Act wrongful take, that is non-compliance with water orders. So you see some pretty high numbers there, particularly in relation to unauthorised take. And it's because of this effort that we've been able to achieve the improved performance that we have in the slide that I showed earlier. That effort will continue into this financial year as we continue to focus on engaging with our customers to ensure that they meet the requirements of the Act. CapEx delivery, capital expenditure, continuing to develop our infrastructure. It's been a significant year, as we highlighted at last year's Growers Conference. We've just completed the Central Rising Main, so that's within the 12 months. And we've brought SMP2 in, but we've also done significant works in each of the rural districts, Redcliff's, the PLC upgrade at Redcliff's C relift. In Robinvale, we've got the heating, ventilation and air conditioning upgrade project to make sure that the main pump station can operate as designed, particularly during the heat of summer. We've got a variety of mains replaced in Merbeen and some works at the pump station. And similarly in Mildura, we've replaced some mains, undertaken some metering upgrades and VSD upgrades as well at the main pump station. So all in all, a good year on the CapEx side for the business. In terms of our rural capital expenditure planning, we've commenced the development of an irrigation infrastructure strategy, which will review the irrigation systems of the 4 districts that we're responsible for and ask the question, if we were to build an irrigation system now, what would it look like? And if in turn it looks significantly different from what we've got, what are we going to do differently about it? We're spending money every year on those systems. How can we upgrade those systems to be more modern and meet the needs of our customers? The considerations that we'll make there are Capacity, that is how much water do our customers need, that appears to be changing. Reliability, how reliable and what sort of duration. Energy use, configuration, high versus low pressure, those sorts of things. So we're engaging with our CSACs and district customers generally on the development of that irrigation infrastructure strategy, and the outcomes from that investment plan will guide our investment in our infrastructure for the foreseeable future once we've completed that planning phase. We're also in the throes of developing our Water Plan 5, as Cheryl alluded to. We're delivering Water Plan 4 at the moment. Water plans are 5-year service, price, revenue, and expenditure plans. That is where you set out all of those things and then work to deliver them. So we're halfway through Water Plan 4, and in the next 12 months, we'll escalate our efforts to begin planning for Water Plan 5, and there'll be a range of opportunities for our customers to engage in those over the next 12 months. In closing, we are responsible, as Cheryl alluded to, delivering the Victorian Murray floodplain restoration project. So this is a table, a chart that indicates the extent of the project and the 9 projects that make up the project that we're responsible for delivering. As you can see, extensive projects from almost from Echuca to the South Australian border. So the purpose of the project is it forms part of Victoria's contribution to the Sustainable Diversion Limit Adjustment Mechanism under the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, contributes to water recovery for environmental purposes, but also means that water doesn't have to be recovered from productive use to generate improved environmental outcomes. The project's progressed very positively in the last 12 months with each of the activities and milestones achieved on time and on budget. So overall, it's a very positive story, with Lower Murray Water taking ownership of those structures once they're completed, expected to be by 2024 to meet Murray-Darling Basin Plan deadlines. So with that, very much encourage you to enjoy the day, enjoy the insights. I'm certainly looking forward to increasing insight into the water market and water delivery challenges that were significant topics a year ago and remain so. And with horticultural redevelopment continuing the district, I expect that pressure will continue. So in closing from me, just a reminder that Lower Murray Water produced Victoria's best tasting tap water for 2020, as announced last week, and tomorrow goes into the national titles to compete against the entries from throughout the country to see if we've got the best tasting tap water. Win, lose or draw at that national title. We've done extremely well. It's a credit to the organisation and all of its employees and their contribution to the successes of Lower Murray Water. Thank you. Enjoy your day.
Okay, good day everyone. I guess I'm okay to start. I'm just waiting for to get set up here. Okay, thanks. I was just making sure I've got control of the screen and everything. Okay, good day everyone. My name's Joe Davis. I work for the MDBA. I'm currently the Senior Director of Operations Improvement at the MDBA. But I was the Senior Director of Operations for 5 years or so. Today, I just thought I'd come here. We've been to this conference for the last 4 years, I think. Just give you a bit of a feel for the state sharing, where we're at with water resources, what the current situation looks like in terms of water shares and things like that. Move on then to a bit of a chat about capacity and shortfall issues. Now, in the authority, my job is to really lead a team and work with the states collectively on dealing with capacity and shortfall issues. So that's more of my cup of tea. Just moving on then, just to make sure everyone's quite aware, the state sharing of the Murray is quite complicated. without going through this too much, basically the upper states get to keep their tributaries. There's an equal share of water above Albury in the system in terms of inflows. And each of the states, New South Wales and Victoria, are required to provide South Australia equally its entitlement flow of 1850. The inflow trends that we've seen in the last couple of years, we've seen 3 really consecutive dry years in the system, really ever since 2016 when we had those floods. It's been really quite dry in the system. But this year we've kind of got a bit of a break, which I'm going to show you in a minute. We've got better inflows. So this plot then just runs to last year's inflows, basically. So 1920. The storage trends in the system are increasing. After we've gone down quite low, you can see this chart here, which runs all the way back to 2000, sort of how the system storage fluctuates. The black line there shows just what the actual storage is at any given time during that period. And you can just see in 2020 here, just this last few months, since April really, we've really rebounded from quite a low bottom that we've seen. The question, of course, is where do we sort of top out? The Bureau is forecasting moving into wetter conditions and things like that. But we're a much more healthy state in terms of our storage now than we were compared to this time last year. This plot then shows just what the daily inflows are to the system. You can see a couple of things on this chart. You can see that really low, the low inflows last year that we saw in 1920. And then we can see that break happen towards the end of our water year, which is towards the end of the financial year, which is into May and June. We can see that sort of continue on into this year. And just recently with that inflow that we saw a couple of weeks ago, we can see that then coming back up to have inflows, quite healthy inflows. It's been an interesting year in terms of the water situation. The catchments have sort of fluctuated between dry and wet since August. We've had the smaller rain events. We had a nice autumn break, but we just didn't get that follow-up. And so we're really hoping for quite a big event to get the storages really moving up again. We have seen quite a substantial period, though, of unregged flows to South Australia too, and they were from June 27th. Through to the 25th of September. Currently, we're re-regulating all the inflows that we're getting. So we've just seen an inflow event come out of the Ovens and Kiwa. We feel that we can regulate that in Lake Victoria, which improves basically state shares. We get another inflow event though, another rainfall event, and we're likely to see that unregulated flows come back into the system. Moving on then, the storage and the system conditions. I just thought this is a new slide that we've developed, and I thought it gives you a nice snapshot of where we are. So Dartmouth's currently about 58%. Transfers remain at minimum rate. We don't need the water in Dartmouth going into Hume. So basically Dartmouth's in a storage mode. We're hoping to store as much as we can up there. Hume is 72%. We've had a fluctuating releases from Hume, where at times we're at minimums when we get rainfall and wet conditions, and then the demand's kicking up quite quickly that we've seen. I think some warmer weather and some drier conditions has caused that. We are currently delivering the operational environmental demands, and we have been since September. Menindee remains the water in Menindee anyway remains as New South Wales as a New South Wales resource, and it's not available to the Murray system. The storage is holding on at about 470 gigalitres after a pretty healthy inflow event from the north, and which is great because Menindee was dry for a couple of years there. It doesn't become part of the shared resource until it gets to 640 gigalitres. And then we're not really forecasting that it will become a shared resource this year unless we get some significant inflows from the north. Lake Victoria sitting pretty much near full. We've had unregulated flows, and Lake Victoria is currently assisting to meet South Australian demands. Really interesting, Lake Victoria, it's nice to see sort of that level this time of the year, and the last couple of years, we've had to make deliveries from Hume into Lake Victoria to get it up to the levels we were comfortable with to sustain summer demands. And the barrages, there's pretty healthy flows down there at the barrages on the back of that unregulated flow into South Australia. And so we're getting a pretty good flush of that water out to sea down there. The bulk water shares then, just touching on this, these are the commitments for the entire year. It's probably, you can see how we the commitments that we break it up into and what percentage of that is, and also then shows what the percentage of Victoria and New South Wales hold in the system. New South Wales and Victoria shares are pretty much closer to equal than they have been in the last couple of years, and because that rainfall has been more general into the system. And moving on then, this next part of the presentation then, I thought I'd just run you through the capacity and shortfall work that we've been doing. And for those of you who are pretty active in this space, last couple of times we've been to Lower Murray Water Committee, this conference anyway, we'll give you updates. I'll give you another update now. Just as a bit of background, about 18 months ago, the MBBA formed quite a small task force to deal with this work, and we've been working very closely with the state jurisdictions on this ever since. Our understanding of this issue has grown significantly in that time. I thought I'd just run you through a little bit of work that we've seen today anyway. So the concern of shortfall risk is not new. It's been around since the mid-90s, 1990s. I think arguments were being had about how to share channel capacities right back into since 1995. The Millennium Drought, though, around the 2000s, mid-2000s, saw us move, well, the joint governments anyway, move away from capacity as an issue into water availability. Those drought years really did put a stop to the discussions about capacity. Since about 2012, 2013, the capacity issue is back. There's also new change in crop types and location. We've seen, new crops like almonds, some cotton, things like that come into the system. And so it really has increased the focus on capacity issues. So there's a number of real risks in this system that we've seen. The reduced capacity of the Barmah choke, which I'm going to go through in a little bit, is one of our major concerns on this in this area. The impacts on the Lower Goulburn, we're working really closely with the Victorian government on those policy changes, and we've got Joe Banks and Mark are going to talk about that a little bit this afternoon. And we've got a pretty big climate change driver on this as well. I've got a couple of plots there from the Inspector General's report, but we've seen really hot temperatures now, prolonged hot temperatures pretty much every year, and it's going to be interesting this summer to see with the Bureau coming up with its forecast what the temperature is going to do. There's a lot of perceptions in this space. The perceptions that there is increased water use downstream of the choke is pretty much wrong, and we've sort of proved that with a couple of things we've got out. Definitely there's been an increase in water use in the Sunraysia area, probably from about Robinvale down, but there hasn't been an increased water flow through the choke because we've got a trade restriction across the choke, and we haven't opened that. So, the water has moved within that lower reach from the choke down, from the Trumbury system into the Sunraysia system, and it's also moved out of the GMID into the Murray. The environmental flows downstream of the choke as well. So the Environment Board will purchase a lot of water downstream of the choke, and they largely use that in terms of the historical demand that we've historically seen downstream of the choke. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Anyway, the MDBA, we're heading up this an intergovernmental investigation of the capacity and shortfall. It's going to take a while, and we've been working on it, but our understanding is accelerating all the time on this issue. Anyway, let's just go through a few of the specifics, I guess, today. So the area of horticultural crops from 2003 to 2018, we've just run this plan, and we're getting areas every 2 years now of horticultural plantings, and you can just see the trends there. So in Victoria, we see this real jump up, and I guess you guys, you guys know this more than I do probably. You get this jump up in the from about the mid 2000s right through to about 2010, and then it plateaus off a bit. The other states have remained constant, but however, this last couple of years, we've seen this real growth in irrigated horticulture across all 3 jurisdictions. Whereas it probably was, the growth was Victorian early on, it's now all 3 states are developing these crops. And this is a really interesting trend, because I think, as we can see, these are higher value crops and they're moving into the system, and this requires us to get water, move demands basically, to service those. Moving on then, water use in summer. So I just thought we'd run through this just to show you how what we're seeing from in terms of a water use pattern to supply those crops basically. So we start with the base entitlement, SA entitlement order, and as you would appreciate, in drought, South Australia gets restricted on its entitlement. It had quite a large drop in the millennium drought years, but really it sits on a nice, the healthy in terms of its usage. It's pretty much constant in terms of its usage. The usage in the reach basically from April to January minus the IVT in the system looks like this. So you can see that pre-drought we used a lot more down in your area of the world, and after drought we've seen that drop off. But we would expect that to drop off because we've seen environmental buybacks in the system and things like that. One thing that we do see though is an increased usage or increased delivery of water down in this area by the adding in environmental water and trade into SA. So I guess the question is, this water looks like it's new. However, that is largely been supplemented, and the use of water in this reach has largely been supplemented by the IVT water. Now, this is a new supply basically into the Murray. Previously, historically, the Murray used to just basically look after itself. The entitlements of the Murray were supplied from the Murray resource, and the entitlements of the Goulburn and the Murrumbidgee were basically used to supply the valley, and any water moving between the reaches was seen as a waste. However, with the trade moved into the system since about the millennium drought, the water is moving freely around, and water is moving out of those tributaries into the Murray. Now, I'll let the Victorians talk much more about this, but in terms of a use pattern, so it's not new water that's coming through the choke for us. It's not new pressure on the Murray resource, but it is a requirement to supply the crops that are being grown down your area of the world from the IVT market, basically coming in from other tributaries. Climate change is also a pretty big risk in this system, and it's one of those really hard things to get our head across. And I think it's one of the major challenges that we're going to be faced with coming forward. You know, there is this reduced inflows, and this increases the risk of water availability. And these 2 bar charts here show pretty much our historical sequence that we measure, which is 1895 through to 2000, and that's what the average used to look like, or the median, sorry. The other one, shows the last 20 years. And so you can see that really reduced conditions there, and the breakdown of how they've been reduced. Environmental holdings in the system is also worth talking about. So the big blue dots there are what the sustainable diversion limit is set to, while the held environmental water there is showed in the green balloons, basically. There is water that was purchased upstream of the choke, and that comes through the choke during largely winter and spring. But you've got a pretty big volume that sits downstream of the choke, and that is largely what's the environmental water that's used during summer. The environmental water use on that is pretty much the same distribution as it was for irrigation in that sense. The Barmah choke capacity for us is the major issue in here from the MDBA and from the joint government's point of view. There's been a trade restriction in place. However, we've been slowly losing capacity in this system for years, basically since about the 1980s. So I guess the question is what's going on, and this is where we've done a lot of work in this project. The current thinking is that sand has and is moving into the choke reach, reducing the capacity and actually causing the riverbanks to move and erode. So the choke is looking quite beaten up. The outside bends are eroding, and we're getting less capacity coming through the system. So it is the major focus for the next period, and there's no simple answers here in this. Lifting constraints through the constraints management system strategy separates environmental water and consumptive demands. We can get more environmental water through at higher flows potentially, and potential bypass option is in the mix as well, which is very expensive, but may move that problem to the next reach. So we've done a major study here at the choke, or we are doing a major study in the choke, and here's just basically the study reach, and the choke itself is pretty much where my cursor is there, just downstream of the confluence with the Edwards. So what the sources of sediment that we found, so the thought that we've got on this study is that sediment is moved into this reach, and it's moved in pre-Yarrawonga dam going in. Back in the turn of the century, there was large land use changes in the upper catchment. There was large gold mining. I've got a couple of pictures of this, land clearing, obviously. And there's also river management that was previously done, like the desnagging and the regulation of Hume to Yarrawonga. All of those things we feel has caused this sand to be mobilized into the river, and that is slowly now moving through this reach and starting to reduce our capacity to deliver. It is a major problem, and it is a major question to joint governments about what we may do about this sand and what we should do, I guess. If it is found that the sand is from European settlement and that sand is not natural in that system, we may be able to remove some of it, but there is a vast quantity of sand, so it's a bit hard to say that we've got a set answer for that, but we are working on it. Just a couple of the pictures from our history and what our ancestors used to do. This is some pictures of gold mining, and it was the Ovens and the Kings rivers that were mined for gold. And basically they used to hit the banks with big sluices. They mobilized a lot of sediment into the river, and we feel that that sediment is probably one of the reasons, one of the sources of sediment in the Choke River reach. The sand movement from our preliminary results, you can just see the bigger dots here show bigger sand movements in this system, and the smaller ones show less. So what is that basically showing? That's showing that more sand is coming into the reach than is leaving, and so we get this accumulation of the sand in the reach. I mean, if you go to towns like Tokemore, Cobram, they've got lovely big sandy beaches, but you go further down in that reach and those sandy beaches aren't a factor or can't be seen. Moving on, so just a quick couple of slides now on managing shortfall risk. So just thought a couple of slides on what we're doing about managing shortfall risk, I guess. So the MDBA, we're the river operator, river management system. We manage the releases, we operate to the agreement, and we forecast, our forecast estimates are based on states' advice. The states then manage obviously the entitlements and the allocation. They control the work licenses, and they provide data to us so we can operate this as a shared river. And then they also define and enforce any restrictions that may be in place. We are, as part of the project as well, developing a cross-government shortfall response plan, where we start to flag to the states that shortfalls are approaching, apply mitigation measures where possible, and there's lots of mitigation measures that we use as just a matter of course now. We then move into a point where a shortfall is actually potentially reached or realised, and there has to be a shortfall sharing discussion that happens. That's not the remit of MDBA. That's part of that needs to be discussed by state ministers and potentially at ministerial council. And then it's up to the states then to implement those restrictions. What we're doing in this space is building a document that all governments are agreed to in terms of how we move from MDBA advising and the mitigation measures aren't basically working. So as we get closer to a shortfall, we put more and more mitigations into place until we have to get to a point where a shortfall is inevitable and there has to be this sharing discussion. So it puts a framework around it. It also allows it to be flagged early to ministers and the Basin Officials Committee. So just a quick slide now, and it's my last slide. So exploring options for the reinstating the delivery capacity. We're looking at the strategic uses of storages below the choke, including Lake Victoria, when we may fill that, when we should fill that, our risk of spill at Lake Victoria as well. There's a potential to do, to re-look at the bypass of the choke. A detailed investigation has been proposed. It hasn't kicked off yet. But what does this mean? There's lots of questions in that, obviously, like what does that mean for the choke trading restriction? What does that mean for the Upper Murray entitlements and things like that? All governments are very aware of these issues. Managing the sediment within the choke is absolutely, the riparian works within the reach between Yarrawonga and Toowoomba. We've also established that to start try and fix some of the erosion issues, but we've seen very akin to the Hume to Yarrawonga program that we've run for the last 30 years or so. And then potentially relaxing constraints greater than 15,000 megalitres per flow downstream Yarrawonga for environmental flows as well is something we're also looking at. But I'd like to just maybe draw that to a close there and thank everyone for listening. I'm happy if we've got time to have a few questions. Okay, so maybe we just, someone's texted me. Sorry, is there a moderator or something? How are we going to do this, guys?
Joe, I'm on the line.
Okay,
It's Kat.
thanks,
Hear me?
Kelly.
Yep, we
I'm
have
finding it
had
hard to run
one.
this.
That's okay. We've had one submitted question and I texted it to you. Would you like me to read it out for you and that way everyone can hear
Yeah,
it?
that'd
as
be
well?
great. That'd be great, Kelly, so everyone can hear it, yeah.
Yep, no problem. I will just get that. Okay. So the question, and feel free, people who are on the line, to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen to add a question in. So this question, Joe, is why is it that in seasons similar to 2016 that MDBA environmental water is not released to top up a small seasonal flood, high river, to create an overbank flow on the lowlands floodplains of the Murray River to save the black box communities that are being lost rapidly? Do you need me to repeat that? It was a little bit long.
No, I think I'm okay. Yeah. So the question really goes around about why didn't we release more environmental water in a year like 2016 so we can achieve better environmental outcomes at the lower end of the river? I guess at the time in 2016, we don't want to make flooding worse. You know, there was a minor flood warning at Wentworth at the time, and we weren't keen to release additional water into that river to make a minor flood into a higher level flood. The choice, I guess it's not MDBA that releases the environmental water in that sense. Environmental water holders request that release from the MDBA. I guess we work with environmental water holders. So at the time, I'm not sure what was, you know, where the environmental holders were at in terms of that demand. But I guess that is an option, and it's probably required under the, you know, if you move into a constraint management strategy, those options are actually are on the table. But it's not just MDBA controlling that at that point in time. It requires discussions from state agencies, environmental water holders, and also the MDBA as we're operating. Kelly, any more?
There are no more submitted questions that were pre-submitted to you, Joe. We haven't had any come through the, oh, here's one, come through the Q&A. So I'll read it out.
Yep, please.
I understand the bypass of the choke is an option that's being considered to better supply water to Lower Murray. However, have options been considered to increase inflows in Menindee?
Yeah.
Thanks for that question.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Inflows in Menindee are really difficult. And it's a New South Wales government issue, I guess. You know, the sustainable diversion limits is also in the north. There is lots of work that has been done in the north to try and increase flows. And you can see when we get water flowing in the north, environmental water holders try to add to that to achieve environmental outcomes. I guess at the end of the day, though, if there is no water in Menindee, that makes it, you know, the water hasn't got through the Darling, and we've just seen come off the back of 3 years of a near record drought. So the drought in the north was much worse for the north anyway this last 3 years than the millennium drought was for the north. I guess it's just going to the basin plan sort of stuff in terms of inflows to the north, the sustainable diversion limits. Also, there's a whole heap of toolkit measures that have been put into place or are being put into place in the north, and it sort of stays as a real challenge.
Okay, Joe, thanks for that. And there are no more questions and we're right bang on time. So we might move to the next little 5-minute, which is a break and an opportunity for everybody to answer 4 questions on the screen. We'd love you to do so. It'll only take you about 23 seconds. So if you could do that, and there's a short video that you can play. It's only a couple of minutes long, so you still have time to go to the toilet or do whatever you want to do as well. Thanks again, Joe, for that presentation, and everybody for your questions.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Hi, I'm Jeff Register, Executive Manager for Delivery at Lower Murray Water. I'm on site this morning at the Central Rising Main replacement, where our contractor Jado Construction is in the final stages of installing the new 2.2 metre diameter pipe to replace the ageing rising main. A total of 550 metres of pipeline has now been installed, with the existing subsurface drainage pipeline also being replaced. Replacement of the original manifold structure, drainage pipes and channel outlet works are now well underway in readiness for the new irrigation season. The original rising main was installed in the early 1950s and has required extensive maintenance to ensure it remained operational. The replacement pipe will generate water savings and efficiencies for the business. The central pipeline feeds over 2,000 irrigation customers in the Mildura district and is a vital piece of infrastructure to ensure we can deliver water to our customers when it's needed. The works are on track to be completed later in August. The system is currently offline to ensure commissioning and cutover works can be completed in time for the new irrigation season. Further information on the shutdown period is available on our website. $3.5 million project has been included in the current pricing for Water Plan 2018 to 2023, and will see a reduction in the ongoing maintenance costs for the rising main. We will continue to keep our customers informed on progress over the coming weeks. Thank you. Hi, I'm Jeff Register, Executive Manager for Delivery at Lower Murray Water. I'm on site this morning at the Central Rising Main replacement, where our contractor Jado Construction is in the final stages of installing the new 2.2 metre diameter pipe to replace the ageing rising main. A total of 550 metres of pipeline has now been installed, with the existing subsurface drainage pipeline also being replaced. Replacement of the original manifold structure, drainage pipes and channel outlet works are now well underway in readiness for the new irrigation season. The original rising main was installed in the early 1950s and has required extensive maintenance to ensure it remained operational. The replacement pipe will generate water savings and efficiencies
Good morning, everyone. I think I accidentally cut Jeff off, but it was the second run there. My name's Mark Bailey. I'm the Manager of Water Resources at Golden Murray Water, but I'm also the Delegated Resource Manager for Northern Victoria, looking after the Victorian Murray resources. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak again today. I've been at the conference a couple of times in the past, and my colleague Andrew Shields has presented last year. Again, we'll be looking at what the seasonal determinations and outlooks are for the year ahead. And I think somebody just clicked on the slide for me because I forgot to do it. Thank you for that. And also just look at some of the details about how the Victorian resources are shared in the Murray. And that was, so we'll build on a little bit of the presentation that Joe has delivered in the last hour. So leaping right ahead, if I can get the slide, there we go. Seasonal determinations were updated last week on the 15th, and we did see quite a large increase in the Murray system where we went from about 40% up to 55%. That was on the back of some really good rainfall that occurred at the start of the month. Compared to this time last year, as we heard earlier with Anthony's presentation, we have seen a lot better resource availability, particularly in the Murray, and even just across Northern Victoria in general. We've seen a couple of our smaller systems in Northern Victoria, the Broken, which maxed out at about 2% high reliability watersheds last year, has actually reached the maximum possible allocation of 100%, both high and low. And the Campaspe system has gone up to 100% this year as well. Our small Bullarook system is the other standout at 100 plus 100, but it only has a very small component and isn't available for trade outside of the system. The other big news that we see in terms of water availability this year is in the New South Wales Murray, whereas last year they did have the same 97% availability for their high security water. This year, I think last year they ended up at about 2 or 3% general security right towards the end of the season. This year, they're up to 26% general security. And I just noticed I forgot to actually mark that on the slide. But so it's not actually low reliability there. It's just confirming that that is the New South Wales general security allocation. And that's actually eased a lot of the demand that we have seen in the past, particularly with water trading prices. Prices are lower compared to this time last year, which is a real godsend for a number of our customers in the Murray and other parts of the Northern Victorian systems. In terms of overall water availability in the Murray, there is more carryover has come into this season from last year. I think that was due to customers looking at some lower prices towards the end of the season as a little bit of rain came through. And I'll talk about that in a couple of moments. But it's the opportunity and to secure some of that water at the end of the season, and also considering what's been happening in other parts of the system. We'll hear a bit later on today from Joe Banks talking about some of the issues with the Goulburn to Murray trade rule review and what's planned out of that, particularly for the coming season. But I think people may have been trying to secure a bit more water within the system just to make sure that they've got adequate water for the summer, and making sure that they've got opportunity to do that, to water when they want to. In terms of the spillable accounts this year, there hasn't been a lot of water actually going to spillable accounts at this stage. There's definitely been no deductions out of the spillable accounts. We have seen Lake Hume rise appreciably. Joe showed us what the levels were just before. That's been consistent across across Northern Victoria, with storages sitting at relatively good positions across the board. As we have seen, Lake Victoria has filled. Some of that water has spilled into the New South Wales accounts because the Victorian share did fill. So part of that is also contributing to the New South Wales general security going up. So overall, a relatively good allocation availability at the moment, and customers are making the most of that where they can. Just want to go through sort of where we finished up with the season last year. and into the start of this season. Joe Davis did mention that there has been a bit of on and off again in terms of releases and operations. That's really borne out when you look at the behaviour of the last few months, particularly with rainfall. So the slide that we're showing at the moment, and the next few slides are all courtesy of the Bureau of Meteorology, but it shows that for the 3 months between April and June, so the final quarter of the 2019-20 season, it was mostly above average, or average or above average, and in some cases very much above average rainfall, particularly in that quarter. But when we look at it a bit more closely, and apologies for the size of this graph here, but it really, this is the April monthly rainfall, the May month, and the June monthly rainfall. A lot of the behaviour that we saw for the 3 months is all dominated by April, where it was a very wet end to the majority of the irrigation season across northern Victoria, and that effectively stopped irrigation within the GMID in particular. A lot of the irrigation had actually demand had decreased in the Lower Murray water region, but that started to put water back into storages. Turn around, some of the storage was falling, and it was a good point, and it certainly was viewed as one of the best autumn breaks that had occurred for a very long time. We then went into a couple of months where the optimism in April started to decrease, particularly when we see large patches of below average rainfall across May, and even further below average conditions again in June. So after some really good positions, we were thinking, oh, okay, well, this is not such a good outcome as we're heading into the new water year, and that really caused some of the lower allocations that we saw at the start of the 2021 season. If we look at the quarter that we've just passed, so the past 3 months, again, we're still seeing quite below average rainfall, particularly in the main harvesting areas, sort of the northeast and into central Victoria, where we have the likes of the ovens and contributions into Dartmouth and Hume, and also into the Goulburn system. It's down here. But up in the northwest, relatively average conditions across the northern plains average, but in that main area of where the storages sit towards the Great Dividing Range, below average rainfall for the majority of that period. Again, looking at what happened, a lot of that was dominated by 1 month's behaviour, particularly in July, which was an extremely dry month. And again, from a river operator perspective and from resource management perspective, it was a bit of a negative view that we were adopting at that point, thinking, well, the optimism that had been coming out from the Bureau of Meteorology in particular, talking about the likelihood of average or above average rainfall wasn't coming to fruition. And that continued for the next couple of months, certainly not as bad as it has been seen in Gippsland over the last 30 days or so. But it was one of those ones where we were looking at the Bureau saying we're expecting to see above average rainfall or near or above average rainfall, but it just wasn't coming. And every month as we got further ahead, we were being told to expect that rainfall, and it didn't actually arrive. So it's been a bit of a strange season as we've gone through. Now, of course, we did see some inflows in October, and I'll talk about that just in a moment. But if we look at what the storage inflows have been in the last 3 months, particularly looking at the Dartmouth and Hume for the Murray system, but Buffalo and William Hovell, which are contributing to the flows downstream of Hume via the ovens, the percentages are still reasonable, although we would like to see them closer to 100%. Conversely, the chances of receiving greater inflows are still pretty high. It would be better to see them at 50 or below. So the higher this number, the less flow that we're actually seeing. So with Dartmouth and Hume, a 72% chance we'd see more flow would be better. It would be much better to see that down lower. Same with Hume. As we go down into the Goulburn system too, which has been a major trade contributor, it has seen relatively drier conditions. These will probably change a little bit as we go further into the month, where we have seen something approaching more of that wetter condition. And I just ask you to bear these numbers in mind when I talk about the scenarios that we have for flows. So I spoke about October turning things around a bit. Once we look at what has happened in the first 2 weeks of October, we can see that we have had some better conditions, although there have been patches of relatively low rainfall. But we did see some good totals, particularly in that first and second week of October. And that really influenced the improvements that we did see last week in terms of seasonal allocations. So while it was nice to see some widespread rainfall, it's still on the lower side up here. I must admit, I'm not an agronomist, I'm not sure, or a farmer, so I'm not sure how that's actually affected the crops in the northwest. But it would be, from where I sit here in Tatura at the moment, it is good to see some of that rainfall coming through and providing some really good inflows into storages. So we have seen a boost, particularly last week. A little bit more rainfall later in the week on the Friday and the Thursday afternoon. That will continue the inflows. So we'll still see some relatively good improvements, I think, but we'll still be looking for further rainfall this month. In terms of what's causing the current conditions, it's really down to La Nina. La Nina, which is based on conditions in the Pacific Ocean. The Bureau of Meteorology, which is our chief source of information, is saying that La Nina is likely to peak in December. So there's still a few months of above average rainfall being forecast. It's saying its intensity could match the 2010 to 2012 La Nina. That's certainly putting a lot of emergency services and the storage operators on alert. They're quite concerned about the propensity for flooding to occur under those circumstances. At this stage, we're saying in the Murray system that there's still a chance of having a spill from the Victorian share of the resource. That's not necessarily corresponding to a floods, not like we saw in 2016-17. Lake Hume is still filling. Victoria has still got airspace within its share, and if we were to fill, it'll spill into the New South Wales share first before it actually physically starts to spill downstream. The other key point about the La Nina that has been forecast for this season is likely to be shorter lived. So once it peaks in December, it's likely to die out fairly quickly, is the advice that is coming from the Bureau. The other bit of news that the Bureau put out Tuesday last week is that the Indian Ocean dipole, which is based on the Indian Ocean temperatures off the northwest coast of Australia, is saying that we're less likely to see a negative dipole. A negative dipole, conversely, is a positive for Southeast Australian rainfall. The conditions over the last couple of weeks have changed so that there's a warming of the temperature off the African coast. That African temperature, the temperature to the west over there is driving it towards a more neutral condition. So the Bureau is not anticipating that we're going to get much of a drive from the climate that's occurring off the northwest. The other one that has been mentioned is the southern annular mode, which is based around Antarctic conditions as they come up from the pole. I must admit, I don't know a lot about it, but it is something that does drive our temperature conditions in conjunction with La Nina. At the moment, it's measuring as a positive in its mode, and a positive in that sense, unlike in the Indian Ocean dipole, is actually likely to bring wetter conditions to the southern parts of Australia. So again, we've still got a reinforcing climate driver for that. Interestingly, and this is the last note on this slide, it's an observation that the Bureau has put on its recent climate drivers, is that there's been over the last 20 or so years, there's certainly been a reduction in the April to October rainfall period, which we normally regard as the peak inflow period to our storages. And they're saying about a 10 to 20% reduction. And that marries up with the slide that Joe showed earlier this morning, comparing behaviour in the Murray-Darling Basin from the late 1800s up until the year 2000, and then from 2000 to 2020, where we've seen quite a large reduction. So that's something that we're trying to emphasise, is that regardless of what's causing climate change, whether it's a natural cycle or it's a man-made induced change, we are seeing a reduction at the time at which we receive peak inflow. The other thing from that is that we're seeing more summer inflow, so some rains that occur sort of December through to February. And that's something just to bear in mind as we approach that part of the year. In terms of the November rainfall outlook, so this has been updated by the Bureau last week. They're still saying, and I realise I haven't got this here, but they're still saying October is likely to be above average. The forecast for November is still showing relatively good conditions, so 10% higher chance of exceeding the average rainfall across much of northern Victoria, which sort of corresponds with some of that change that they've seen with climate change and with other conditions. So progressing out further into the year than we've seen previously. In terms of the longer term, going out into towards the end of January, still conditions are likely to be wetter. It's an interesting perspective that we might see this after having those 3 years of consecutive very dry conditions. Hopefully this trend continues and we're able to get some continued flows into storage and make sure that we're building up a bit of reserve for next year. So ideally we'll get to that 100% allocation of high reliability water shares this year and be able to take that and beyond and take that into the 2021 season. In terms of the outlook that we have for the year, this information is available on the Northern Victorian Resource Manager website, which is nvrm.net.au. And these additional scenarios are what we put out on the website to give people a bit more of a breakdown about where particular conditions might actually take us. So bearing in mind that average is 50%, dry is 90% probability of exceedance, which we were talking about before, or the chance of greater that we saw for the storage inflows. At the moment, we're seeing around about 60 to 70% chance of greater flows into the likes of Hume and Dartmouth. That would put us in the sort of the average to below average category. And that's saying we're on track to get to 100% by mid-February next year. By the start of midway through December, we're likely to be somewhere around the 80 to 90%. Not a bad outcome. It would be better if it was higher sooner, just to give a bit more confidence to people about where we're at and a bit more time to plan the rest of their year. But it's something that we can look forward to. And that's consistent with our Goulburn system as well. As we talked about, there are some issues or some changes occurring with the way in which access to the Goulburn can be made, and Joe Banks will talk about that. But it's also showing a relatively strong performance, slightly below 100% mid-February if we continue on the below average inflows, which is about a 70% chance of receiving greater flows. Just in terms of the trading options, these are probably likely to have changed a little bit, but not significantly over the last few days, because I finished off these slides late last week. But the Goulburn Intervalley trade balance is currently sitting at 283 gigalitres. That's well above the trade limit of 200. And a lot of that has come about because of improvements to the Goulburn allocation that have occurred since the 200 gigalitre balance was reached. So with some of the legacy trade volumes that are associated with the Goulburn Intervalley trade balance, each time we make an improvement in the Goulburn, it actually adds to the IVT balance and puts some more water into that. So we haven't seen any calls out from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority at the moment that would contribute to a reduction of the balance. Given the current state of the system and the unregulated flows that have occurred quite well for part of August and September, we may not see that balance start to come down until perhaps December. It'll really depend on how the season pans out, and some of the flows that we might receive out of the ovens and Murrumbidgee systems, for example. The Murrumbidgee intervalley trade balance is closed. It's currently sitting at 102 gigalitres. So that will have to see water being called out of the Murrumbidgee, again by the MDBA in consultation with Water New South Wales in this case. And the third of the major trading options is the Barmah choke. It's currently sitting, well, as of last week, it was sitting at a 0.2 of megalitre, so it's effectively closed. So there's no opportunity for trade downstream. And I do apologise, I meant to check that this morning and got carried away on some other material that I was working on. So just in terms of where we're currently sitting with resource availability in Northern Victoria, we are sitting at higher allocations than the same time last year, which is a good position to be in. Ideally, we would like to be much closer to the 100%, but just as systems are recovering from the 3 years of drought, it's actually not too bad of a position to be in, and we're reasonably comfortable as we're going forward. The availability of the New South Wales General Security is definitely a bonus compared to what's happened over the last couple of years, both for the customers who rely on that themselves, but anybody who's looking to trade resource, that's another option for people. And in terms of the rest of the season, above average rain is favoured, and that's going to be a good thing, particularly if it falls into in the storages. For a while there, we were seeing some of the rain that was falling was predominantly on the plains, and that wasn't going into storage. So with La Nina, hopefully she actually provides the flows that we're seeking and continues to provide that good inflow and availability over the next 12 months. That was it for this morning. If there's any questions, I'm quite happy to take them and lead into the next session.
Mark, we do have a pre-submitted question. We've got none in the Q&A tab, but this will give us a bit of time to think about some questions. So the question that was submitted on registration, thank you very much for that, is why don't we have 100% water when the river and storages are full?
We generally do. It depends on which storages are full. So Lake Victoria has a much smaller availability of resource for Gold Murray water, for Gold Murray water and Lower Murray water and all of the other authorities. It's normally the case of when we're seeing Hume and Dartmouth at higher capacities that we're able to get to 100% quite early in the piece. So with those storages still recovering after the drought of the last 3 years, Hume can fill relatively quickly compared to Dartmouth, but we don't always have to have them full to get to 100%. It really depends on what sort of inflows are occurring and what sort of use is occurring at a particular time, as well as how much carryover has occurred. So all of those three can combine to determine availability at a particular time.
Great, thanks for that, Mark. So we do have a couple of minutes before we're due, about 5 minutes before the little short break. We will stick to our times because some people are going to be logging in for certain sessions. So even though it's tempting to roll on and make it a bit earlier, some people might miss out. So if there are no more questions from the audience, wherever they may be, okay, gone. We'll head to those very quick 4 short poll questions, and thanks to everyone who filled out the last ones, and another 5 will actually be about a 10-minute break. We'll resume with Chris Olziak at 10:35. Thanks
everyone.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Olzak. I'm a director at AITHA. We provide independent advice to governments and businesses on water markets, water policy and infrastructure. Pleased to be here for the third year in a row of the Growers Conference, and would like to thank Lower Murray Water, in particular Cheryl and Anthony and Kelly and Alison, for organising this year under difficult circumstances. Thanks and well done. So as usual, I will talk about water markets in the Southern Connected System, and particularly focused on the Lower Murray. As soon as I get the presentation working. So the structure of today, I will go back through the 2019-20 year in review, drawing a lot on AITHA's water markets report and some of the key market movements and statistics from the previous year. And then we'll look at how 2020-21 is shaping up, including off the back of Mark's presentation around where the climate is sitting. And then finally, I'll talk about AITHA's work for the Victorian government that was done in collaboration with the other states around the long-term water supply demand balance in the Lower Murray as a result of the further development of horticulture below the choke. So turning to the year in review for 2019-20, a few facts at a glance. So we've estimated that there was over $500 million worth of commercial allocation trade in the Southern Murray-Darling Basin in 2019-20. The average prices varied pretty significantly. Above the choke in the New South Wales Murray, the average price was only around $300 per megalitre, whereas below the choke in the Victorian Zone 7 Murray, where you are, the average price for the year was almost $650 per megalitre. But what we all saw was that allocation prices decreased substantially from January to June, a drop of 74%. In the entitlement market, there was significant transfers in 2019-20 with over $1 billion worth of entitlement trade for the year, and that's excluding trade within Murrumbidgee and Murray Irrigation Corporations. The total entitlement market value was over $26 billion based on the estimates of the price of each entitlement on issue. And around about 3% of the entitlement market turned over in 2019-20, which is fairly normal for the entitlement market. So looking at allocation prices over the last couple of years has been a pretty interesting story. So if we go back to 2018-19, we saw the dry conditions driving prices up steadily over the course of the year. And they increased from around about that $200 to $300 per megalitre mark up to around about $500 per megalitre at the start of last season. And with the poor forecasts, low inflows, what we saw was that for the first half of 2019-20, prices continued upwards. And I think at the Growers Conference last year, we were seeing a couple of trades close to that $1,000 per megalitre mark. Now, what we saw from January onwards was a huge drop off in prices, a 74% reduction in the average allocation price across the Southern MDB, off the back of some of those autumn breaks and rainfall events, as well as optimism around the forecast, driven by those climate outlooks from the BOM. And there was quite a drop off in irrigation demand from January onwards, as well as there was good rainfall events within the growing areas. From an entitlements perspective, this chart shows the significant growth in the value of entitlements over the last 5 years. High reliability entitlements have increased substantially in value over that period of time. What we saw last year is that growth drew to a bit of a halt. From about January onwards, prices in the entitlement market started to drop off a little bit, and many dropped by around about 10%. But they've steadied in the last few months, and we have seen them pretty much leveling off in price. So Victorian Zone 7 high reliability entitlements currently trading around about that $6,200 per megalitre mark, excluding the allocation. So that's on a dry basis. Interestingly, for the Lower Murray Victorian irrigators, low reliability water shares held below the choke in Zone 7 have been trading at around about $650 per megalitre, but with demand for storage increasing pretty dramatically below the choke, we've seen a couple of trades in recent weeks go through at around about $900 per megalitre, so a big increase. Turning to the outlook for 2020-21, and I won't repeat what Mark's gone through from a climate perspective, but really trying to think about what that means from the market perspective. To put this in context, let's go back to look at the last 4 years. The total amount of water allocated to all of the entitlements on issue in the Southern MDB has decreased dramatically. You can see those last 4 bars, which is the impacts of the drought after a wet 2016. Drying conditions meant less water available. And as a result, the average annual prices over that period of time increased substantially each year. And I think we all started to think that the price could only go up. But again, what we saw this last year was that the price actually collapsed. When we look at the monthly averages, that price actually came back down off the back of improved climate outlooks. Now, let's just take a look at how much water has been allocated after the 15th of October allocation announcements over the last 3 years. So what you can see here is that compared to 2018-19, this year is now 34% better in terms of improved allocation volumes overall to the entire system, and actually 88% better compared to where we were last year. So as a result of that, we've seen this significant reduction in the prices within the allocation market. So things are a lot, I'm pleased that things are a lot better for irrigators and growers and those that are relying on allocation markets at the moment compared to where we were the last couple of years. But what we also need to recognise is that the Lower Murray is constrained. Mark just showed that the Goulburn system is closed off to the Lower Murray, the Murrumbidgee is closed off, and so is the Barmah Choke. So what we've seen is continued and actually increasing price divergences between the Lower Murray and the other systems of the Goulburn, Murrumbidgee, and Upper Murray. So quite significantly higher prices in the Lower Murray as a result of those constraints. Now, it's also worth noting here, this chart presents in blue an estimate of the water available as of 15th of October in each of the key zones. And then what we've outlined is the average inflow conditions that Mark's presented and where that might mean total water availability ends up for consumptive held entitlements in each of the zones from about February if we get average inflows from here. So you can see that Murray below Barmah, there's a significant amount of additional potential water that will be allocated to entitlements below the Murray. So I'll turn now to the water supply and demand scenarios. As I mentioned at the start, AETHR was engaged by the Victorian government, DELP, to update some previous work we've done, examining the growth in horticultural demand and comparing that to the volume of water available for irrigators, particularly below the Barmah Choke. So that report is available on the Victorian Water Register website, and it has a lot of detail around all of the assumptions and data sources from that report. But effectively, we worked with a number of state representatives. We worked with people from Lower Murray Water to get the best possible data and be as transparent as we could be about the assumptions within that report. I'll go through the findings quickly and refer you to the report for more detail. What this report shows, we looked at 4 different scenarios to look at water supply below the choke in the Lower Murray, but across the 3 states. And what it shows is that supply or water allocated to consumptive held entitlements between dry and wet years varies between about 1,300 and 1,500 gigalitres. It's only in very, very extreme dry years, like what we had in 2007-08, when Victorian high reliability watersheds were in that kind of 20 to 30% range, that you get much lower water allocated to entitlements held below the choke. And this supply does not include any carryover water. It's just supply within a particular irrigation year, and we've cut out all of the environmental entitlements. So this is just water that's available for consumptive use. We then compare that to our estimates of current water use based on actual data from 2018-19, plus our estimates of the increase in water use driven by increasing almonds, particularly below the choke, and when they get to full maturity. So those are, we've profiled the plantings of those almonds and mapped those out to their maturity at about that 5 to 7 year mark when they're using their peak water use. And that shows that without anything else changing, that demand could be above 1,200 gigs per year. And that's pretty close to the amount of water available in most seasons from a dry, average and wet season, and it's much more than would be supplied in an extreme dry repeat of 07-08. Now, these findings should be pretty familiar. I've presented these previously, and it's important to note that they don't include carryover and they don't include intervalley trade. So any shortfall in an extreme dry year would need to be made up by carryover that's held and available below the choke, or through trade from other regions. So as mentioned, what we call the headroom, or the water available in excess of that horticultural demand, is pretty tight in that 100 to 300 gigs per year between dry and wet years. When we add in additional plantings, so these are planned plantings, but they haven't gone in the ground as yet, or they may have gone in the ground this winter. It's not highly speculative developments. It's developments that are seen as likely to go ahead. That would increase the total demand to slightly over 1,400 gigs per year in the Lower Murray region, which again really pushes up against those supply limits each year and reinforces the importance of carryover and intervalley trade to the Lower Murray. But a big assumption is that no one else drops out. So there's no structural adjustment within the current water users, and that estimate of 2018-19 water use continues into the future without change. So it may mean that some of the existing enterprises do change their water use, do drop out, and there is some of that structural change occurring. But overall, the message is tight for the Lower Murray, and that's going to mean that the system is going to be on a knife's edge more often and generally into the future. And these IVT constraints are going to be really important for water prices. So the divergences that we've seen in allocation prices this year so far are likely to continue into the future and create important challenges for the way that individual irrigators meet their supply and demand and manage their risk. And as Mark said, it's really been only in the last couple of weeks where the outlook and the rainfall, or the outlook, which has been positive, and the BOMs had a lot of green over there and blue over their maps, has actually converted into some decent rainfalls and improved allocations in this last announcement. But things still need to, there's still a fair way to go in terms of getting to 100% in the Vic high. But it seems hopeful that we will get there, and particularly if the BOMs forecast around La Nina comes through. So we're looking in much better shape than we were last year, absolutely. And prices have really come down pretty significantly. They've come down again in the last couple of weeks as a result of those improved allocation announcements. So as I always ask and encourage people to think about, what's your plan for the short term? How can you take advantage of these lower allocation prices? Are you already thinking about 21, 22 and your options available there? And then what's your longer term strategy to deal with these tightening conditions within the Lower Murray? So some of the key things to consider in managing risk, one is carryover. So I think Mark mentioned that there was a significant increase in carryover into this year. There was about 1,200 gigs of water was carried over on New South Wales and Victorian entitlements from last year into this year. That was up from about 800 gigs the year before. And really to us is a response to the severe scarcity conditions that people were thinking ahead, buying ahead and carrying over for this next year. And then the carryover actually increased as a result of decreased demand from January to June as conditions improved. So I think people were left with a little bit more water that they didn't quite expect that they would have, and that's meant that there was large volumes of carryover come into the season. But also what we saw at the end of last season was that was a real scramble for carryover parking space, particularly below the choke, where parking of water on low reliability water shares in Victorian Zone 7, the cost of that increased significantly, up to between kind of $60 and $90 per megalitre just to carry that over securely and below the choke. So we think carryover is going to be really important into the future. If you own Victorian low reliability water shares, they're increasing in value as a result of this demand for carryover, and worth you considering how you're using those as part of your business. The other thing to think about at the moment is leases. If you can't afford entitlements or think they might be overvalued, leases have dropped back a little bit as a result of the improved water availability. So the pricing is perhaps a little bit more amenable to those that are looking to lock in a price for their water needs over the next, say, 3 to 5 years, and get some more security around where their pricing might be. So there are a couple of options to think about. In conclusion, I think I've said this a number of times over the years. There is a new normal around water prices. It's driven by these significant changes in both supply and demand. And consider your options, get good advice, talk to multiple people, and make clear, level-headed decisions about how you're going to approach the season ahead. And then, I'd encourage everyone to consider about how you would make better prices this year. How will you stretch that out through the potential products that might be available, either carryover, leases, forwards, these options that are available that can help you manage price risk over multiple years. Much of what I've drawn upon today comes from our water markets report. You can get that on our website or from this link once the presentation comes available. If people want more detail and more information from us, we also provide a free quarterly, very short email. So feel free to email the email address there to get on that list, or email me directly. I'll put my details up in a second. We also provide monthly market insights reports for people who are interested in getting an independent update on a more monthly basis, as opposed to just our annual free report. So again, feel free to get in contact with us if that's of interest. So look, I'll hand over for questions now, and Kelly, feel free to jump in.
Great, thanks, Chris. We didn't have any pre-submitted questions, and we haven't had any in the Q&A, which surprises me because last year I think you had quite a few questions. So just a reminder to those listening, you don't need to wait until the end to pop your question in. If you've got one as Chris is talking, you just pop it in that Q&A little icon down at the bottom. Okay, so I see there's one there. I can read it out if you like, or Chris, are you able to access them? Are you still online?
Oh, there we go. Yep, sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing. Frank, why should existing irrigators wear the pain of increasing risks of shortfall when government has been warned for many years this risk is only growing? Government seems to allow a problem to just grow. I'm going to leave that one. Let's go.
So I don't think that one, we'll park that one, and we can have that passed on to Joe Banks in his session. There is a question that hasn't been submitted today, but previously had been raised. The person isn't able to attend. And you may have already addressed this, Chris, but the question is around whether permanent watershed prices are as closely tied to water availability as allocation.
Yeah, so I think we've seen that there is some linkage, but it's not all that strong. So when people are making decisions about buying or selling entitlements, they're thinking about the long term. And sure, they are also taking into consideration, what they might get for, or the value of the allocation that might come, this year and next year when they're buying it, and that does influence the prices a little bit. But really, entitlement purchase decisions are long term. So that's where people are thinking about, climate change and the returns that they can get from those entitlements in their use in irrigated agriculture. So we generally see the entitlement market responding to broader economic factors like commodity prices, interest rates, and these other longer term drivers of irrigated agriculture, whereas the allocation market is certainly incredibly responsive to the ups and downs of water availability.
We have had another question. It's a crystal ball question for you, Chris. So you're good at these ones. And that's come through the Q&A box. What is the upper range of prices you could predict this year?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if we talk just Lower Murray for a second, so below the choke where you all are, because I think there's going to be continued discrepancies and differences between the Lower Murray and the other areas. Look, before this rainfall over the last couple of weeks, it's really saw a pretty dramatic improvement in the allocations below the Murray. I thought that allocation prices in the Lower Murray, if it didn't rain and the BOM's forecast didn't come to fruition, that we could be back up at that kind of $400 to $500 per megalitre mark by Christmas time. But now, after these improved inflows, the significant rainfall event that has occurred, it is harder to see it in the Lower Murray getting back up above that, too much above that $300 per megalitre mark. And look, it's all just going to depend on the rainfall and allocation improvements from here, and the extent to which others jump into the market and look to secure their water needs for the following year. And I think one of the reasons the water market's been a bit flat and come down this year is that many horticulturalists actually purchased water to carry over last year. So they've actually got themselves in a good situation to deal with what was looking pretty ordinary before the forecast changed. So to me, what's happened over the last 12 to 18 months is people making good risk-based decisions to ensure their position, and then they've got the water available to secure their needs this year. So many people have done things that have proven to be the right decisions to cover themselves, and then the opportunity is now there to say, well, where do we go from here? How do we secure lower cost water for the next seasons ahead?
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. Are there any more questions from anyone? If not, we'll look at wrapping this up, and I'll just stall a little bit more because I'm sure there might be a few more questions out there. Okay, well, we might call that an end to a fantastic presentation, Chris. It's always a pleasure to listen to your wrap up of the seasons past, and also just some insight into how the season is looking from a water market perspective. And as you mentioned, if people think of questions later, they've got some contact details for you, and I'm sure you're open to questions from our customer base.
Yep, very much so, Kelly, and thanks to you and Lower Murray Water again for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to seeing you in person next year, hopefully.
No problem. So that will depend on the poll results and whether our customers want you to. Okay, all right. Well, everyone, we'll move on to the next. This is an interesting slide we just whipped up. I had some feedback via text from one of the attendees saying that if everybody watched the old photos, you may have recognised some people there, but how the gender diversity has changed somewhat from 1964 to 2020. So we've got another slide that shows the Board of Directors 2020, where we have a 50-50 representation of female and male, and I haven't put up there the executives, but there are 2 out of 5 females. So that was interesting. So feel free to send in your little comments on some of the pictures you see, and if we can whip something up to respond, we will. So we'll head to the next poll, and I was notified that if you're on a web browser, you might not see the poll. So the poll should come up on the screen from a mobile device or a desktop. To those who can't see it, do not fear, because there will be a full survey at the end of this session and available on our website afterwards. So if you love to give feedback, and we certainly love to receive it, please follow that up. Okay, so we'll resume back with Joe Banks talking about Victoria's water policy at 11:10. Thanks.
Hi everyone, it's Joe Banks here from the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. I think I'll kick off. We're just sorting out access and control to the slides. So thanks all for having me. I was just taking a chance to come along and give a quick update on some of the work going on in the Victorian water policy space and to build on some of the presentations you've seen, particularly from Joe Davis and Mark Bailey. So I wanted to talk, give a quick, it's going to be a bit of a flyby, but a quick update on 5 things. Firstly, about delivery risks and what's changing in the system. Secondly, to update people on the process the Minister's been undertaking to personally assess works licences over the last 12 months and continuing into the future. To talk about the work going on in the Goulburn to Murray Trade Review and what's going to happen this year with the operation of the Goulburn IVT as part of that. And also just to touch briefly on the work Victoria is doing to support the ACCC Water Markets Inquiry. So delivery risks, just to clarify for everyone what we're talking about, the delivery shortfall occurs when river operators aren't able to deliver water that's allocated to people when they want to use it. So this is different from water availability risks and dry years with very low allocations. This is about when people have water allocated to them, but for various reasons, we're not able to actually get all that water to people when they want to use it. And it can happen for a couple of reasons. It's a long river, the Murray. It can happen if there's a heat wave and a sudden spike in demands that haven't been planned for. And it can also happen if there's not enough capacity in the river system over the course of the full year, and particularly during that peak summer, autumn irrigation period to get the water physically down there. The outcome, if such a thing happens, may result in temporary rationing of water users to share that shortfall in how much can be delivered. As Joe Davis said, from an irrigation perspective, this has really only happened back in 2002, and there was a lot of focus in those years in the early 2000s on these delivery and capacity risks, and it got overtaken a bit by the millennium drought and water availability risks. But since that time, we've been putting in a lot of work with the MDBA and the other states to really understand what's changing in the system and what the future might look like. So these risks are not new. They have been largely avoided in the past. Some of you may have seen this before, but I just wanted to show this little picture which really summarizes some of the key things that are changing, which I think Joe Davis also touched on in some way. So the capacity of the Barmah choke has certainly reduced over the last 20 to 30 years, which affects our ability to get watered down. Similarly, with a drier climate, inflows from other key sources further downstream of the choke have also been affected, particularly from the Darling River. In terms of demands, as you know, in your region, irrigation demands have gone up. They have gone down in other regions, particularly upstream of Naya in Turrumbry. But collectively, when you put that together, what we're seeing is somewhat sustained irrigation demands compared to historical levels, even though water has been recovered from the consumptive pool under the basin plan. And with some of that environmental water needing to be delivered to achieve environmental outcomes as well, we are delivering in total somewhat larger volumes through the system, but a lot of that extra volume is also coming through the tributaries. So there's been more pressure transferred onto the tributaries as people in the Murray look to source more water from allocation trade for other reasons, from other regions, which naturally flows from less water available in the consumptive pool. So look, all these things together, there are some quite significant changes across the system. So what we are doing as a Victorian government, particularly, and some of the things I'll touch on today, reviewing Goulburn to Murray trade and operating rules to make sure that we recognise the physical and environmental tolerances throughout the system, not just at the Barmah choke. As you're probably aware, the Minister is directly assessing works licenses to take a precautionary approach in making sure that further demand does not increase the risk of delivery shortfalls or create greater impacts on existing users in the event if we ever did have a delivery shortfall. And we're also looking to provide clear information about what's changing in the system and those risks. It's not just us. As Joe Davis said, there's a big body of work going on with the other states, and the MDBA is putting a lot of effort into this with us as well, particularly at the moment with a focus on building understanding of the issue and what the key factors are that are driving changes in risks and what we can do about it. To think about how we can optimize how we run the River Murray and look where possible to look at possible infrastructure options to address some of that lost capacity. We're also talking to the other states about what our minister is doing and looking at ways to collectively assess the cumulative impact of increasing extractions across state borders. And as Joe said, we want to make sure we have a coordinated response plan ready in case a shortfall does occur. I might just touch a little bit on the works license assessment process, which I talked about last year, but it's been 12 months since then. So what's happened? The minister has personally made decisions on now in total 38 works license applications since that time. So that's right along the length of the Murray below the Barmah choke, both in Golden Murray water and Lower Murray water. There have been a small number of applications approved, but with strict conditions of zero extraction share. And those applications have generally been people who have been in the process of getting government approvals for a long time, or existing irrigators who are moving their supply point from one place to another. The condition of zero extraction share means that these new developments will be the first to be restricted in a water delivery shortfall event to protect impacts on existing entitlement holders if that rationing is ever required. So that extraction share condition, just to be clear, many of you may be aware, is on a works license. It's a bit like a delivery share in an irrigation district. It is a share of what the customer is allowed to take during a ration. What we're seeing on the ground, certainly from our end, we're seeing the number of applications making their way through the irrigation development process slow somewhat. And based on the decisions we're seeing from the minister and what she said before, obviously future applications would need to demonstrate no cumulative impact to existing users or the environment in order to be approved by the minister. Next, I wanted to talk about the Goulburn to Murray trade review, just to give an update on that. We've been out quite a bit earlier this year, and we're hoping to be out again soon to talk about the next phase of this review. Why we're doing it, as I mentioned, in recent years, deliveries of traded water from the Goulburn have led to unseasonable high flows, sustained high flows, and unacceptable environmental impacts to the condition of the lower Goulburn River. So we are looking at reviewing the trade and operating rules for the Goulburn River to support a sustainable working river that operates in line with basin plan trade objectives. So that means recognising the ecological thresholds of the Goulburn, but within that, doing all we can to maximise trade opportunities without impacting other entitlements. Again, the context, just to link back to what we said before, these significant changes in the basin are leading to significant changes in where people are sourcing their water and how water is being delivered. Prior to 2014, sorry, I should say this graph shows deliveries to the Murray from inter-valley trade accounts in the Goulburn and Murrumbidgee. So the blue is the volume delivered each year from the Goulburn to supply traded water, and the orange is the Murrumbidgee. And you can see before 2014, generally there always was some trade and delivery from those two tributaries to the Murray, but generally at lower volumes. Since 2014-15, there has been much more significant volumes delivered through those tributaries. Often shared between the Goulburn and the Murrumbidgee, but those 2 years in 17-18 and 18-19, as a result of the drought in the New South Wales, really sort of turbocharged what was happening in the Goulburn, and almost all the trade from outside the Murray came from the Goulburn River and led to record volumes of delivery down the lower Goulburn and those sustained high flows down the Goulburn over summer. This one is a hydrograph of that 18-19 year and what was happening with that delivery of IVT water down the lower Goulburn. And the real issue we're talking about here, you can see between sort of December and February, March that year, there was these long extended periods of very consistent unseasonal high flows, and that had the effect of eroding away at the banks and notching the banks. And over the long term, if those sorts of unseasonal flows at that steady level kept happening, what you'll see is the banks start to erode away and collapse, and significant deterioration in the condition of the river. We've been out earlier this year. We're partway through this process. So we were out, many of you may know, in March through June this year, talking about the issues and starting to talk about the types of trade rules for the future. What we heard quite a lot, obviously, particularly we heard concerns about changes coming in partway through an irrigation season. We heard concerns about the importance of looking at infrastructure options and other ways to deliver water down the Goulburn wherever possible. We heard concerns about the risk that trade restrictions could add to water delivery shortfalls. And in terms of a trade rule, I think generally across the board, we heard quite strongly that people accepted the need for environmental protection, but wanted to balance that with a rule that allowed for some seasonal flexibility and being able to deliver water outside of those peak periods. We also heard very strongly the importance of, when we come back to do this second phase of consultation, the need to do that face-to-face and to have a real discussion with people. So the minister's really taken that on board. You may have seen she made an announcement in August this year that the timeline for this would adjust a bit, so that any changes to the rules will not come into place this season, but for the start of the following season. And that's really to give people that certainty about not coming in for season, but it's also to give us a bit of time to do more consultation with the community, and hopefully, COVID permitting, being out there in person, talking to you face to face. So the timeline at the bottom really just spells out those key steps. On the left-hand side, you'll see what we've done in the past. So through 2019, we brought in the interim operating regime. There were some initial changes to the rule to bring tag trade into line with all other trade. And we did do that first phase of consultation in the last quarter of 1920. This year, the ministers extended the interim arrangements for the current season. We are currently working on a regulatory impact statement, which will bring together all the options for change and will be the basis of further consultation with you later this year. Realistically, we're hoping to start being out there hopefully in December this year. Again, our objective is to be able to come out in person and talk to you face to face. It's obviously much preferable for everyone compared to Zoom and webinars. We're a bit at the mercy of what goes on with this pandemic, unfortunately, but that's what we're trying to achieve. So further consultation, hopefully starting late this year. We'll absolutely be consulting through summer, and we'll be looking to get the outcomes of that consultation back to the minister for a government decision on the preferred approach for the future and how to implement that in sort of early-ish February, March next year, so that we can have an announcement about what the future rule looks like well before the start of next season. The review itself, just reminding people the processes from here. The outcome we are working towards is to be able to operate the Goulburn River within ecological tolerances and to have a trade rule that within those tolerances maximises the trade opportunity, but also allows you to deliver that traded water in a way that doesn't add to any delivery risks in the River Murray system. So we'll be pulling that together in a regulatory impact statement. We have to do that as part of any proposed change. So that will include options for those operating rules for the lower Goulburn River, which will be informed by a scientific risk assessment, plus a couple of options for a new trade rule for the future to match that based on what we heard from you. The RIS will include some of those options for infrastructure and how we could operate differently, and it will include a clear description of those assessment of impacts of the potential changes, economic, environmental, and social, and the outcome of the RIS will be recommended long-term options. So look, as I said, the next steps from here, we are hoping to have that RIS consultation paper for you all to read out later this year. We're aiming to be out there for face-to-face, hopefully later this year. If you do want more context, obviously this this presentation is available afterwards, but that website there has all the documentation and history and background on the Goulburn to Murray Trade Review if there's more you'd like to understand about it. I'll just skip on. So I mentioned the interim operating arrangements for this year. The Minister for Water has asked the MDBA to plan for only calling out 40 gigalitres a month from the Goulburn IVT this summer autumn. That's 10 gigalitres a month lower than what was aimed for last summer. It's part of these steps to gradually reduce the environmental damage. We do have some information on the Water Register website about what that's likely to mean for inter-valley trade deliveries and what that will mean for trade opportunities this year. Mark Bailey showed you the balance of the IVT account is currently about 280 gigalitres. Trade is possible once it's below 200. So we will need a couple of months of calling out water before we start to see trade opportunity opening up. And as Joe and Mark said, currently Lake Victoria is pretty full, so it's unlikely over the next month or so there'll be much water called out. But once we get into that peak irrigation season, we expect we'll start to see water called out. And after a month or two after that, you would think you would start to see some trade opportunity opening up. The MDBA has worked with us on this. They've incorporated that 40 gigalitre a month requests into their annual operating outlook that is available on the website. In that outlook, no shortfalls are currently forecast, but it is only an outlook. Every season's different. You can't anticipate everything can happen, but they do have a range of operational planning within that to manage shortfall risks with some of the other levers available in the system, including how they use the Murrumbidgee IVT to complement it, how they use the bypass capacity of the Mulwala Canal, and how we use Lake Victoria to set up the system for the year. I think I'm pretty close to the end of my time, but if I can, I might just touch very quickly on the ACCC Water Markets Inquiry. Many of you will be aware, significant inquiry going on at the moment. Victoria is very keen to support it because we think water markets are central to the business of many of our irrigators and our communities. The interim report did come out earlier this year. It does reinforce the importance of water markets. It does acknowledge some of the good work that Victoria's already doing, but it also does identify some areas for potential reform to secure those current and future benefits of the water market, particularly around regulatory oversight, compliance and enforcement, particularly around market transparency and trade processing, and also particularly aligning with some of the work both I and the MDBA have just been talking about making sure our market settings keep up with the significant changes that have happened across the connected Southern Murray-Darling Basin. What we're doing, we're absolutely supporting the inquiry. We want to make sure that the final report has practical and effective options for Victorian benefit that can deliver real tangible benefits for market function. We absolutely support measures that will improve water market transparency. We want to make sure market settings are right to give communities confidence in managing water. Part of that, we're absolutely very keen to see what the ACCC has to say around licensing and regulation of brokers and market intermediaries. And we will absolutely be encouraging the ACCC to push for other states for consistency with accounting, metering and monitoring to back up some of the strong work that Lower Murray Water and Victorian agencies are doing on this zero tolerance approach to unauthorised take. We've done a few things recently which complement this. Obviously, the market transparency work we've been talking about. We've just put in a new thing this year, which we're just building on with New South Wales to capture the reason for trade when people trade allocation, which will be the first step of trying to provide greater visibility and transparency about those sort of emerging products that Chris mentioned, like leases, forward contracts, and carryover parking arrangements. And we're obviously doing work like the Goulburn to Murray trade rule to make sure that our trading rules do reflect the ecological tolerance of the system and do reflect the changes that have happened across the basin. That's all I had to present on. I think there might be a couple of questions. 8, Kelly kindly tells me, so she'll keep me busy.
So Joe, I think it's probably fair that we answer the pre-submitted ones first, if that's possible. And then we'll get through as many. We can shorten the little poll session because I know that people are keen to have the answers of these questions. So if you start with the pre-submitted 3, and then we'll get through as many of the 5 as possible. But our commitment to attendees is we will ensure that these questions do get passed on to Joe if he doesn't finish them all, and we'll feed them back probably through our customer service advisory committees and strategic advisory committee.
Well, why don't I make a start, Cal, and then head me off from answering the wrong question. So we had one about, can you guarantee Lower Murray water irrigators can access their full water allocation when they require, given the extra extraction restriction you are placing on our river system? I think this really touches on a lot of what I've presented. The short answer is rivers are challenging systems to operate, and there are never any we cannot absolutely guarantee that water can always be delivered when it's needed. The best we can do, and what we are doing, is making sure we fully understand what's changed in the system and fully understand the risks, and do all we can to mitigate and avoid those risks occurring. But also, when they do, make sure we have clear systems in place and clear information for irrigators so that they can understand those risks and take steps wherever possible to manage and mitigate them themselves. I might jump, there's an extension of that one about why should existing irrigators wear the pain of increasing risks of shortfall when government has been warned for many years that this risk is only growing. Government seems to allow the problem just to grow. Look, I think what our minister is doing in directly assessing works licenses is a step along that path. So certainly you'll see from the decision she's made, there's fewer applications coming in, but those that are being approved are not being granted extraction share, which would be their right during a delivery shortfall. And that's really making sure that existing irrigators' rights or share during a ration are not eroded by new people coming in. The broader picture behind that is really understanding the fundamentals of how the risks in the system are actually changing and what's really driving those risks. And as you've probably seen from some of the presentations today, some of the key things there are actually not so much demand risks, but some of the key changes in the supply capacity through the system. So understanding those helps us think about collectively, all of us as joint governments, what the best targeted responses are to those changing risks.
And Joe, I probably did lead you up the garden path. They're not 8, they're only 7. That was a Q&A one, so there you go. There's one more remaining pre-submitted question about infrastructure.
Yeah. So there is one here about infrastructure, which says, since the completion of the Dartmouth Dam in 1979, there's been no more storages or dams built. In that time, we have since had droughts and floods. In the last 20 years, substantial growth in the Mallee catchment area with horticultural plantings. And situations like the very wet years in 2011 and 16 with irrigators spilling some of their carryover water with dry years on either side. The question is, does it make sense to build more dams, locks or storages along the river to hold the water for those dry years? Look, we are not looking at building more dams and weirs along the Murray River. The reality is all the effective and practical sites are largely built on. These are expensive bits of infrastructure, and I think the other flow in is ultimately building more dams and weirs means greater regulation of the river, which will have impacts for delivery of programs like the Basin Plan to restore some of those environmental flows through the system. So there would certainly be, it's not all positive, there's some big flow on costs and adding greater storage to the system would also need to be complemented by understanding the implications to that of the ability of water to flow through the system for environmental outcomes. So look, no, we're not really looking at new dams and storage sites, but having said that, what we are doing is looking at how we can continue to run the river better as it evolves and changes to make sure we optimize how we use it to manage that delivery security. And look, in terms of carryover, really we made a number of significant reforms through the Northern Region Sustainable Water Strategy to try and get the most we could out of our dams there. The key changes there were to make sure that people only lose water if the dams actually spill. So now as a result of those changes, it's become a significantly more useful tool. And ultimately people will only lose carryover if Hume Dam spills, and the only water that people lose is water above their underlying entitlement volume. So you never actually lose water without having access to your full entitlement volume in that year. It may turn dry the next year, you're right, and you only lose water if the capacity of the dams, particularly Hume Dam, is actually reached. I think that's all the pre-recorded ones, Kel. I'm just catching up with the ones that have just come in.
Yeah, that is all of the pre-recorded, pre-submitted.
There's one from, that's come in saying, Joe, you mentioned that supply from the Darling is reduced because of lower inflows due to climate change, but we all know the finger's being pointed at floodplain harvesting. What's the proportion of reduced inflows attributable to changes in New South Wales policies? Look, unfortunately, I can't answer that question, but we are also very interested in understanding the cause of changes in the Darling, and I think New South Wales are too, in fairness. As you know, there's a lot of work going on at the moment, particularly on floodplain harvesting and particularly on understanding compliance and some of the changes going on in that system. And it is important to understand that, and it is important that the Darling is regulated within the sustainable diversion limits set under the Basin Plan in the same way that all our rivers are. There's another question about how many licenses in megalitres has the government issued or allowed to happen since first becoming aware of delivery risks since 2002? A very important note on that, the cap on diversions from the Murray-Darling Basin was set based on diversion levels in 1994. So effectively, since that 1994 date, we have not been handing out any more rights to take water since 1994. So the total volume of entitlement, or the total amount of water that can be taken from the region, has not actually increased since then. What we have seen is who is using those rights moving around. So absolutely, we've seen more water that was used further upstream of Nile now being used in the Lower Murray Water region. And we've seen water that was previously used for irrigation now used for environmental purposes, and some of that is delivered along the length of the system. The next one, given the higher demand for water from permanent crops and the supply only just being more than demand in recent years, if there is a reduction in IVT volumes, what do you think is the best solution in fixing the problem, given that I would hope letting crops perish isn't an option? So look, as I said, the objective with this IV Goulburn to Murray trade review is firstly to make sure the environmental thresholds are sustainable, and then to make sure we don't restrict trade unnecessarily through that. So you will see those options through the RIS. In reality, it's likely that it may mean trade is a little more constrained than it was in those record years you saw in the graph in 2017-18 and 18-19. They were somewhat unusual years historically, particularly because of the drought in New South Wales, the Goulburn was really one of the only sources of traded water that people were really looking to. If you take a slightly longer view and look at it, absolutely a lot more irrigators are reliant on trade now, but they do tend to source water from a variety of different places. From the Goulburn, from within the Lower Murray region, and particularly upstream from Turrumbry, from the Murrumbidgee. You've seen the market from the Murrumbidgee come back online over the last 2 years. There was over 130 gigalitres traded out of the Murrumbidgee last year, and there's already been over 100 traded out this year. So it will mean change, but there are still other opportunities in the water market. There is a question about what infrastructure upgrades in terms of storage capacity has the Victorian government made on the system to mitigate the delivery risk to irrigators in the Lower Murray region since 2002. So one to draw attention to there, with the decommissioning of Lake McCowan in the early 2000s, part of that program was to bring onto line for the benefit of the whole Victorian Murray region, the Victorian Mid-Murray storages, which is around Lake Boga and Cow Swamp at the bottom end of the Torrumbarry system. So that is one mitigating and balancing storage tool we now have in the system to help how we operate it. As we mentioned, we are working with the MDBA and the other states to look at how we use other things, like how we manage weir pools, how we manage Lake Victoria through the season to help optimise that system.
Joe, I might just mention we have one more question in the Q&A box, but that will need to be it because we have run into the next poll a bit, which we can manage. So if you'd like, we'll just have this last question and then move on.
It's an odd last question, Cal. I'm tempted to take it as a statement rather than a question. Can you give me any extra interpretation on that one?
So the Q&A, which is visible to others in the chat room, it's regarding your briefing of the Minister on delivery shortfalls in Goulburn IVT. And the question I don't quite understand, and if it's not a question, then feel free not to answer, but would you like to take this opportunity to withdraw your recollections of briefing the Minister? I'm not sure that that is a question regarding the content of your presentation, but I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to say to that one, to be honest. I think certainly we are continuing to brief the Minister through this process. All the work we are doing on the Goulburn IVT and collectively with the MDBA on delivery shortfall risks are things that the Minister is very interested in and has made a personal focus. So everything we're learning as we go, obviously we're trying to consolidate and brief the Minister so that we can get the best possible information for you. Like you guys, getting access to the Minister at the moment in COVID is a tricky time, the same as it's hard getting out and talking to you guys face to face. That's one of the challenges we're facing, and I think that's one of the real reasons, like one of the contributing things, along with the need to make sure we do face-to-face consultation, why the Minister's decided to extend this process and not bring in place changes to the rules this year to make sure this is done thoroughly and we get the chance to have a really thorough chat to you guys as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joe, for your presentation and for answering. And just on that, the efforts that you went to for the several webinars when, you know, we couldn't have those face-to-face meetings regarding the Goulburn to Murray Trade Review that you held with our customer committees, they were much appreciated.
Thanks, Kel. And well, look, no worries at all. And really, hopefully we can be out there talking to you face-to-face later on this year, because we would much rather be doing that if we can. So hopefully see you all soon.
Okay, so we'll go to the next short poll and we'll resume with our final speaker of the day, Nicole King, shortly.
G'day, I'm Scott Barnes, Superintendent for the construction of SMP2. I'm at the recently completed channel works here at Reckless. The project has delivered over 3 kilometres of modernised channel in Merbein and 2 kilometres of channel in Reckless. In total, 5.7 kilometres of channel has been modernised. Fencing works are now complete at Reckless and Merbein fencing is underway and on track to be completed in the coming weeks. Channel bank raising works in Reckless Channel has also been completed. 2 regulators have been upgraded, masons and kewers, with increased capacity to meet the new downstream demands. 4 culverts have been upgraded, Passchendaele Avenue, Meridian Road in Merbein, and During Road and Occupational Crossing in Reckless. Final commissioning of the Merbein and Reckless termination structures were completed earlier this month. This involved testing the functionality of the newly installed valves to ensure that the maximum design flows can be successfully achieved. Given the challenging timeframe set by the irrigation shutdown schedule, the project team has done exceptionally well to deliver the works ahead of schedule. This is in recognition of the collaboration between Lower Murray Water and Fulton Hogan throughout this project. Finally, we'd like to thank our customers for their ongoing support in making SMP2 construction such a success. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you today on water compliance. I've got an update for you all. I'll run through over the next few slides. I wanted just to start by letting you know that there's a lot that's been going on in the last year. So Grace Mitchell, Executive Director, attended last year's conference and talked through compliance and what's been going on. Bit of a focus then on what we've been doing to implement the Murray-Darling Basin Compact across Victoria, and Lower Murray Water's important part in that work. But there's been a fair bit more that's happened since. So today I'll run through the framework and how it's been reinforced most recently in Victoria through the work of the department, the priorities we have for compliance and enforcement, and also some details about the work we're doing with water corporations, including Lower Murray, to make sure compliance is robust and supports really strong markets and confidence in markets in Victoria. So first thing to mention here is that, as you know, compliance is important. There are a few things I wanted to underscore about that. We know it's a limited resource and is a precious one at that, and very important to all of you. The Victorian government work recognises that it does need to be managed fairly for all users, including farmers and households, communities and the environment. It supports that fair access to water and confidence that the framework for entitlements and water sharing, as well as the market, is being managed with everyone being held to account to the same rules. It deters people from illegally taking and using water, and water theft does really fundamentally undermine the health of the environment and the communities in Victoria. The thing, though, to emphasise is that Victoria has a very strong record of compliance, and the focus for us is making sure it remains so as conditions change. The DELP role is to provide that framework for compliance on behalf of the Victorian Government and the Minister, and water corporations, including Lower Murray, administer that framework and are responsible for those compliance enforcement outcomes in your areas. They are expected to have really strong compliance strategies that demonstrate how they'll meet obligations to manage and prioritise compliance and enforce the Water Act. And Lower Murray does have a really strong approach to compliance and enforcement. It uses strong metering to provide information on a bit of a dashboard report that demonstrates where the risks are, which is a really strong tool for managing compliance. As I was saying, on to the next slide, there is a really strong record of compliance across Victoria. So we just need to zip back to that last slide. Thanks very much. We have a policy of zero tolerance, which I'll take us through in a moment. And the focus is basin and statewide. So obviously in the Sunraysia, as prices stay high, we have to make sure everything is done right and prioritise compliance. But that's true in other places, including SHEP across the other parts of the state in the north. Develops in the framework in the last year that are worth going over quickly, just show that there's really strong focus and remains really strong focus on this stuff. So compliance and enforcement guidelines were issued by the department in November last year, and we have a new non-urban metering policy as well. So both of those two things set the scene for water corporations to develop their own compliance strategies and plans, which is a requirement of the Murray-Darling Basin Agreement, and a plan for rolling out metering and continuing to do that. We have really strong metering in Victoria, but we need to keep improving that and evolving that with even more detection and follow-up as a benefit. In July this year, leading on from legislation that the Victorian government passed last year, there are now fines that can be issued for unauthorised take with new regulations passed. All water corporations are now implementing that framework so they can start issuing fines for situations where people take more than they're entitled to under the Water Act. That is for smaller amounts of water, and it's intended to be a really quick tool to act resolutely on any unauthorised take. But obviously the compliance strategies can go all the way through to court action as well. So another example of where strengthening compliance is happening. The third thing to mention here is that the Victorian government has also just run a review process to make sure that we're really staying on top of compliance and making sure it's dealing with risks across the state. Des Pearson, who's an ex-Auditor General, did have a look at all water corporations as well as DELP to see where we can improve, and I'll go into that in a little bit of detail later on. The good news, which I'll get to, is that we are still doing well, but we need to have that sustained focus to keep doing it. And I've added a quote at the bottom of this slide just to reinforce that the Minister is aware and proud of our strong compliance framework, but wanting us to continue to lead the way. Briefly, before I move on to the next slide, I just wanted to go back to the guidelines because they really tell us what the general approach for compliance should be. There are principles there. So risk-based means that you deal with your biggest risks first and use that to drive who and how you look at compliance in each water corporations. Responsive, so unauthorised take needs swift action, and that's supported by the guidelines. Transparent, so people know what kind of risks water corporations will consider be focusing on. Accountable and consistent, so consistent across the state as well. Moving on to that next slide, I mentioned zero tolerance, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time just to talk about what that actually means because we do hear it. But in practice, what it means is any water theft is unacceptable. It negatively impacts others and it can undermine confidence in the market. Water theft is defined by going above your allocation in your bank account, more than you should. It maintains confidence in the water market and water resource management by ensuring that that action of any unauthorised take is dealt with and that everyone's playing by the same rules so that there's a really level playing field for all water users. If you weren't aware already, but I'm sure you are, the Water Act prohibits negative account balances, and particularly with the increased metering we have in the Victorian state, which will continue to be the case, those accounts can be detected and investigated, and that's the expectation of the guidelines and how they're implemented within the water corporations. Des Pearson, when he came and had a look at how we're going across Victoria, he confirmed that the levels aren't excessive, but they are higher than desirable. And given the pressure on markets, that's something we want to keep working on. There's scope for what he calls more proactive mitigation measures and timely and rigorous enforcement action. So what that might look like in a water corporation is much more actively engaging with customers. And I know that's something Lower Murray is really prioritising to let you know when you might be creeping up to a negative balance so that action can be taken before you get into that negative or unauthorised take or water theft situation. The implementation of the review, which is something I'll talk to over in the next slide, will happen as those rate meters continue to be rolled out under the requirements in the metering action plans that we have in place in Victoria. The Minister for Water, another quote there, obviously zero tolerance reflects the fact that unauthorised water take is unacceptable and it could negatively impact on other irrigators who are doing the right thing. So not only would it affect an irrigator individually, potentially, as we've talked about, by perhaps getting into an unauthorised take situation, but across the market and reinforcing it is one of the impacts we want to mitigate here. So just going back to my, I've zipped through the slides a bit too quickly and I'm not navigating them very well, but I might just flip back to the one I'm on to next, which is zero tolerance for unauthorised take, and what that actually means for irrigators and for growers at the conference today. The irrigators, as you know, must maintain account balances, and that means not going into negative. Water corporations, with the use of telemetry, including Lower Murray, know when those account balances are nearing zero through reporting and metering and telemetry, as I've mentioned. That means the systems that are in place can be used to be data-driven, to investigate all potential breaches and take swift enforcement action where necessary. The type of enforcement action will be risk-based, as I mentioned up the front, and from this year includes fines. So you might see very quick, swift action through a notice and then a fine, all the way through to court action. And I've added a banner to the bottom of the slide here. One of the important things we're focusing on from DES's review as we continue to reinforce the framework is making sure that people are seeing the information they need about zero tolerance on water theft. So it's communicated really widely and understood within each area. I wanted also to briefly touch on priorities for this season and next season, so you're aware of what DELP is doing. As I mentioned up front, we are implementing the independent review of compliance and enforcement with water corporations. Des Pearson ran that review earlier this year, and he highlighted the need to do that due to risks and harms delivering compliance actually become heightened when there's ongoing drought conditions and high water markets in northern Victoria. So that was seen as a really strong driver for why you want to make sure we're getting it right on compliance. The review included 40 recommendations across DELP as well as the other water corporations. So they're the water corporations together with Lower Murray in the basin, as well as Melbourne and Southern Rural Water. There was a focus on a few key themes. One of them is communications, which I've just mentioned before. Training, that's talking about making sure water corporations have good support to train staff to do compliance work, including authorised officers. Consistency across the state is a real priority for DELP's work to make sure that the level playing field spans more than one water corporation and there's a common outcome across the state. Planning and reporting is really important because that helps us get ahead of the risk and understand where we can focus our efforts in compliance into the future. And increasing metering and strengthening enforcement will be themes. So we're working, as I said, with the water corporations on a plan to implement all of that in the next 12 months. The Minister has asked Des Pearson to review, come back and have a look at how we're going in June next year to keep us on track and to continue to improve. I've mentioned communications and increased reporting. They're really important tools so that DELP can understand as a whole, as a state, how we're performing on compliance and where can we provide that assistance to help the framework come alive in each of the water corporations. And consistent communications and comms are a real priority for us as well at the moment. They were the main themes I wanted to draw out on compliance and enforcement as a topic. I have mentioned up front and wanted to reiterate that Lower Murray Water is doing a lot of work, well aware of the conversations with customers to make sure that you're able to manage accounts and the importance of that zero tolerance for reinforcing the market. So thanks very much for the opportunity to come along and talk today and to present on this topic. And very happy to take any questions if there are any that have turned up in the time I've been talking or since. Thanks, Kel.
No, it appears your name's not Joe, so we haven't had lots of questions.
That's good. I'm glad he's been able to help.
But we will give attendees a few minutes to pop a question in the Q&A box and before we move on. So thank you, Nicole. That was very informative and much appreciated. So if we have any questions for Nicole, please don't be shy, pop them in the Q&A box before we move on to closing out the conference with some insights from Warren Lloyd, who is our past chair of our custom committee and current deputy chair of our board, and he hasn't responded to my text, but pretty sure third generation or fourth generation irrigator, been irrigating for 130 years, his family. Okay, so that didn't work. We didn't get any questions come in, Nicole, but that's okay. If you've got any questions, please, you can contact Lower Murray Water directly regarding compliance. We'd be happy to have the conversations with you. And yeah, thanks again, Nicole, for attending. Oh, we have one last, I knew that would work. We do have a question come in. It's come in the Q&A box. Nicole, I'm not sure if you can see it, but I'm happy to read it out if you like. If you can't.
I can see that, Kel, so I'm happy to read it out and then see if I can answer it. So the question that you can all possibly see is that Lower Murray Water has stated that negative account balances would be locked down. The question is, we purchased water when it was a peak this year, and I know of growers that topped up their accounts in May or June. Why would the accounts not be locked down? So I think this is partly a question for Lower Murray Water, as well as me on behalf of DELP. So the zero tolerance approach I was mentioning before is about timely and resolute action. We're aware with the increased use of metering that information about when accounts are going in and out of negative is much more live than it ever used to be. So I think the practice that's been referring to here is perhaps topping up at a later point in time. That is not something that is consistent with the zero tolerance approach that the ministers prioritised for the state. I might hand over the rest of that question to Lower Murray, but it is, I guess the other thing to point out here is the way in which Lower Murray operationalises it is consistent with their own compliance strategies. So I think it's a question of getting that balance right over time.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Nicole. And we don't have our General Manager at the moment online for compliance. However, I think Anthony's on the line if he'd like to answer anything. Otherwise, we can certainly follow that up with the person who asked the question. If you wanted to contact us, we can do that. Anthony, are you on the line?
Yes, I am here, Kelly. Can you hear me?
Sure can. Would you like to comment on this before we move to the next question? There's another one there, Nicole, in the chat box.
Yeah, I certainly can. Thanks. As I alluded to in my presentation, we've certainly escalated our efforts in managing negative account balances. There are cases where some customers may have a short period of negative balance or a relatively low period of negative balance. And whilst that's not preferred or not ideal, we can certainly work our way through that with the customer. However, large negative balances for long periods of time are unacceptable. We've got 2 cases in court at the moment, specifically related to that particular activity. So this is an emerging area and priority for Lower Murray Water. Again, the data that I presented suggested we've come a long way and we still have some way to go. So I think a reasonable observation that there still may be some customers in negative balances, but we're working to address that, working to improve that, and we'll take another further step forward this irrigation season in ensuring that all our customers have equitable access and use of water. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Anthony. There is one more question that we've got time for. However, I'm not quite sure it's really relevant to Nicole. I'm not sure if you can see that, Nicole.
Thanks, Kelly. I can. So I'm happy to kind of read it out, but it does appear to relate to access charges and allocations as opposed to compliance. So it's a question about should government be required to provide 100% account balances to irrigators for 100% access charges? And I think that's a question about allocations that are determined by water corporations, and then the related charges that apply. So yeah, it is a little bit off topic, and I wonder whether that's one we can take on notice.
Yeah. No, I think we can, Nicole, we can certainly follow that up with the person who asked the question, no problem. All right, so there's no more questions and we will move into the next wrap up. So there is, that is the last of our formal presenters, except as I mentioned before, there's a chance to have a chat, to listen to, Warren Lloyd provide some insights and wrap up from the day. So don't go anywhere. Here's the last of the polls, and then after that we have a link which will also be placed in your chat chat box for the broader customer survey regarding this conference, because we didn't know if it would work putting on a virtual conference. So the questions that are in there, you can give us a feedback whether you think this should be the normal way we go, or in addition to face-to-face, or just get back to face-to-face when we can. Lots of questions, well, only 15, so it won't take you more than about 4.5 minutes. So have we got that link in the chat there now? Just see, yep, it's a Survey Monkey. You're welcome to do it now or to do it at your leisure, but we would really appreciate your feedback so that we can continue to provide these growers conferences to you, whether that be twice a year, once a year, every 2 years, every 5 years, and that's part of the survey. So if you want, you know, to give us feedback on how often you think they should be run, that's the place to do it. So I think with that, we'll have a quick couple of minute break, and then we'll be joined by Warren Lloyd to close out with his insights of the day. So don't go anywhere. Warren, standing by. Before we do head to Warren, while he's just turning his camera on, as mentioned before, the conference material will be available on our website, a live recording, and also the presentations separately, and we will do that as soon as we possibly can. Probably won't be today, but it won't be too far off. We might get up tomorrow if we can. So tell your friends who couldn't make it, if they'd like to listen, that's how they can access that. And please fill out the survey, and I'll turn off now and hand over to Warren.
Thanks, Kelly. And look, thank you to everyone that's participated in this Growers Conference, the third one that Lower Murray Water's put on. As a former member of the customer committees, I think it's really important that we run these, and I want to congratulate Kelly and her team, because it's easy during a pandemic to say it's too hard, but I think it's really important that we've been able to conduct it. I've really enjoyed the speakers that we've had today and what we've looked at. So we've had the overview, overall view of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority through Joseph Davis. We've then gone into what happens within our state with Mark Bailey. We've had a look at water markets with Chris Oljak from AITHA, and then to the government, looking at policy with Joe Banks from DELP, and also hearing from our minister through Nicole King. So with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, thanks Joe Davis, really insightful. It's great to see that there's an office of the MDBA here in Mildura. I particularly found it interesting, the impacts, the potential human impacts on the Barmah choke that occurred 100 years ago. And it does make me think, what things are we doing now that are going to have a detrimental impact to future generations in another 100 years? Mark Bailey, I've always enjoyed your presentations. I can tell you that I look with great interest on the 1st and 15th of every month to see what's happened to the water allocation. From that perspective, it can be a bit of a mystery about how it's worked out. So it's great to get an idea of the weather conditions and the impacts that create those decisions. So thank you. Chris Oljak from AITHA, you know, I always enjoy your presentations, Chris. I do get worried when you use titles like new norm, although it's much easier to hear those in a season where it appears to be raining as opposed to 12 months ago when it was incredibly dry. The key thing about your presentation for customers, I think, is to really think about strategy and their business. How can they utilise the current conditions to help them into the future? Joe Banks, you're a repeat person that comes back to us, and we really appreciate it. Often you're talking on very difficult subjects. I did write a quote of yours that rivers are challenging systems to operate, and I absolutely agree. The Goulburn to Murray Trade Review has great impacts. I've appreciated the community engagement that DELP have conducted in that space, and thank you for giving a presentation and update. We look forward to seeing you again. And finally, from the Minister's Office, Nicole King, you know, as a board member, I can tell you that compliance has been a major focus for our board for the last 12 months. I think what you said there is absolutely spot on. Our position is that it is an evolving space, and we're committed to improving what it is that we do. The key message that I took from your presentation is that there now is an ability to issue fines through our organisation. And I guess my appeal to those customers who've logged on to this conference is to spread that message out there. And it does highlight the importance of our customer committees, that we have that engagement and we find out better ways that we can communicate and have that transparency. But I think as a state, we should be proud of the compliance that we are doing. I do believe that we're leading the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. And, you know, I think that there's no opportunity to rest on laurels. It's a bit like my farm. I think if you're not making improvement, you're going backwards. So that's what we're committed to doing. So that really is my overview of the conference. I would like to thank once again the presenters. I wish you were here so we could give you a gift as an appreciation. Perhaps a bottle of water of the best tasting water in Victoria. I'd like to pay tribute to the staff of Lower Murray Water. I think in Anthony's presentation, it showed that we've had a really challenging space in the last 12 months, no more so than dealing with a pandemic. But if you look at an instance like the power outage at Robinvale, in which power was down for 1 hour, I think it was a lot longer for the township of Robinvale. And certainly the private diverters in that area had far greater concerns of the amount of time that they didn't have power. All the work that happened in that period and with the blue-green algae issues occurred in really trying hot conditions, and the staff worked tirelessly to achieve positive outcomes. And I'm very proud of what they do as a director, and I want to acknowledge that. Within that, I'd like to acknowledge Kelly, you and your team for putting on this conference. There's a lot of work that goes on in the background. It would be easy during a pandemic to say, oh, look, it's too hard, we're not going to bother about it. But the fact that we've been able to put it on, I think it's been a great credit to you and the work that you're doing. And finally, I really would like to acknowledge the rural customers that have logged in. I think when you've got perfect spraying conditions, beautiful day outside, it's hard to put time away. But, you know, it's great to see people that are engaged. I'd encourage any of you who are logged on that aren't part of a customer committee to get involved. You would have seen in some of the breaks that we do have vacancies. And we're certainly keen to find ways to get more females involved in irrigating and in informing Lower Murray Water about what it is that we should be doing. So I think I've covered everything that I wanted to say. There was one question that came up. The question was, 6 weeks is too long during winter for maintenance for citrus growers. Can this be sped up by working weekends on projects, as this is critical for growers of citrus? I absolutely agree. I think, you know, the pump districts in particular were set up traditionally for vines. Going forwards, we need to make sure that we have flexibility. The SMP was, one of the parameters of SMP was to provide water 365 days a year. And that is something that we as a board are trying to ensure that we're moving towards that in terms of our rural business. To the individual who wrote that question, can I recommend that you get in touch with the staff at Lower Murray Water to talk about that particular issue. If you're in the Mildura region, we had a major break because we replaced the rising central main, which is a key infrastructure for the pump districts and something that shouldn't happen again not for another 50 years. Finally, before I hand back to Kelly, please fill in the surveys. That's the best way that we can analyse what we do with these growers conferences and try and see how we can improve for the future. So thanks, Kelly, and thanks for this opportunity to do the closing remarks.
Okay, thanks for that, Warren. It's okay, you didn't really need to hand back to me because you got my text saying remind the plug about the survey. And thanks also for the reminder about the customer committees. Over 7 committees, we have 7 vacancies, yeah, we'd really like to fill them. So get in contact with me if you feel like that's something that you'd like to do. Talk to the other committee members in your district. And thanks again. We won't go on. We have had a great time bringing this to you, and I hope you've had a good time in today. And we welcome your feedback. And Warren, thanks for your insight and the wrap up from today. You know, as a 4th generation irrigation customer yourself, you bring a lot of really good insight and understanding and empathy for our customer base, and also being the board member. Thanks for your kind words. Okay, we will call this to a close. Thanks all, and hopefully we'll see you next year, face to face.